Okay, I think it's recording. So, okay, yes. Let me just share it to you here. Can I attach a file? Okay. Okay, so I sent a copy of the PDF file here in the chat box. You may download it, and so you can place some comments or notes in your PDF file as we move along the discussion. Okay, now that we can start.
Good morning, Miss. It's not in our chat box, Miss.
Really? It shows a sent here. Can I send it to Angelica's messenger na lang, and then she'll be the one to forward it.
Sige, Miss. I'll forward it onto the batch, Miss. Thank you.
Okay, I sent it na. Were you able to open it? Yeah. Okay, so we can start now. All right, so let's start. Good morning, everyone. So for this Sunday's review, but I thank you for attending, even though it's a Sunday. For the entire day, we will be having a review on taxation. This morning will be all about principles of taxation, and in the afternoon, we will have a review on tax remedies. Okay, so let's begin. So let's start with the concept and purpose of taxation. So I believe you already have an idea of what taxation is, but let's just define what is taxation. So taxation is the power by which the sovereign, or when we say sovereign, the government, through its lawmaking body, raises revenue to defray the necessary expenses of the government. So from this definition alone, we can say that we can already infer that taxation is exercised by the government. So meaning private individuals or private entities cannot impose taxation on us. No? So kanang mga private persons or kanang mga companies, they cannot ask us to pay tax. Only the government can impose tax because it is only the sovereign that has the power to exercise taxation. And then when we say sovereign, diba, it's very broad, sovereign government. So asa man nga part sa government ang maka-exercise sa power of taxation. It is being exercised through its lawmaking body. So who is the lawmaking body of the government? So if we are to slice the government into three parts, diba, we have the legislative department, we have the executive department, and we have the judiciary or judicial department. So ang lawmaking body is the legislative department. So therefore, in particular, taxation is being exercised by the legislative body, the legislative department of the government. And since when we say legislative, this is on a national level, we are referring to Congress. And then Congress has two houses, no, the upper house and the lower house. The upper house being the Senate and the lower house being your House of Representatives. So these two houses, ang kaniyong duha ka houses, both houses, upper house and the lower house, the Senate and the House of Representatives, they have the power to impose tax on a national level. And if we zoom in to a local government unit level, so meaning local nga level, diba? We have the municipalities, we have the cities, we have the province, we have the barangays. So the lawmaking body of these LGUs or local government units are its sanggunian. So we have the sangguniang bayan, sangguniang pambarangay, and kanang mga sanggunian. Si sanggunian ang mura og counterpart sa Congress sa local nga level. So therefore, sa city, ang city council or ang sanggunian sa city, sila ang muhimo or mo-impose og tax sa mga individuals residing in that LGU. And then from the definition also of taxation, we can see here the purpose of taxation: to raise revenue to defray the necessary expenses of the government. So if we move on to the purpose of taxation, we can see here that the primary purpose of taxation is revenue purpose. To raise funds or property, nganong kailangan man manguha og funds or property si government or si state, para to enable the state to promote the general welfare and protection of the people. So to defray the necessary expenses of the government, because without taxation, the government will not have money to use for the operations of the government. And then ang kaning operation of the government, the existence of the government, diba, is for the general welfare and protection of the people. So kung walay tax, walay makaprotect nato, kanang sweldo sa mga police, diba? Their salary is funded by our taxes. Ang sweldo sa ato ang president, ang sweldo sa ato ang mga government officials, ang ilahang mga sweldo is coming from the tax collections. And then ang pagbayad sa kuryente sa ato ang government offices, ang pag-operate ang pagpalit sa mga equipment o mga vehicles, like for example ang garbage truck, no? So how can the government collect our garbages without the garbage truck? So they have to procure or buy mga vehicles for that purpose. Unya asa man sila upuhag kwarta. So the money came from the collection of taxes. So the primary purpose of taxation is really to raise revenue to defray the necessary expenses of the government. And kaning necessary expenses of the government are for the general welfare and protection of the people. Okay, so that is the primary purpose why government is collecting taxes from us. Now, there are also secondary or non-revenue purposes. So although, as a general rule, the government imposes taxes in order to raise revenue to defray its necessary expenses, the government can also collect taxes from us for other purposes that are not related to revenue purposes. So for example, being used as an implement of police power. So by the way, when we speak of police power, dili ni siya power sa police, okay? So power sa police mag-arrest, solve of crime. So dili na siya power sa police ha, ang police power. So in a legal perspective, when we hear the word police power, that is actually referring to the power to make laws. Power to make laws. So police power in a legal perspective actually refers to the power of the Congress to make laws. And then these laws are meaningless if they will not be implemented, right? So if maghimo og law si Congress, but diha ra kutob, okay na law na siya, but wala siya na-implement, wala siya meaning. So we need to implement. So ang kaning implementation of police power is the implementation of laws. So if you are to implement a law, for example, ang kaning anti-money laundering law, so ang AMLA nato, kung mustay ra siya din ha sa Congress, wala siya meaning. But if you are to implement AMLA, so anti-money laundering, the Anti-Money Laundering Act, you need to create an anti-money laundering council. No? So pag-implementing mo, paghimo kag council, mang-employ kag people, mamalit ka o PPEs, mag-construct ka sa ilang office, and so on. So we need tax to finance the implementation of police power. Another is the regulation of activities or industries. So this is for a regulatory purpose, such as the rehabilitation and stabilization of a threatened industry. So for example, let's say the coconut industry. If you want to protect the coconut industry, then you can impose for example, a cocoa levy tax or any tax related to the coconut industry para maka-raise you of more revenue to protect this particular industry, which is in my case the coconut industry. So even though the collection of such tax is for the benefit of a specific industry, it is still valid because the rule that taxes should be used for the public doesn't mean that tanan jud persons sa Philippines ang maka-benefit. So pwede ang maka-benefit is a specific industry or specific group of persons. So in my example, the stabilization of a threatened industry, which is the coconut industry, you can do that. Reduction of social inequality. This is achieved through a progressive system of taxation. So we can use taxation in order to even out the wealth of the people. That means that if you are rich, if you are earning more, you should be taxed more. If you are earning less, your tax should also be lesser para ma-reduce ang ato ang social inequality. So this type of tax, progressive system of taxation, is encouraged by our Constitution. Now, when we say progressive system, the higher the tax base, the higher should be the tax. Okay, so this is to reduce social inequality. Then encourage economic growth through the grant of incentives or exemptions. So for example, an example of this will be PEZA. So PEZA, Philippine Economic Zone Authority. PEZA is granted the power to give tax incentives to certain businesses. So for example, if you want to engage into a business of exports, and then ang imuhang office will be situated in a PEZA zone, within the zone of PEZA. So you will be granted a tax holiday. So kung may kag tax holiday, na kay holiday sa tax, dili ka pa bayaran og tax for a specific period. So for example, 3 years or 5 years, depending on the nature of your business. But PEZA has the power to grant you a tax holiday. And this is to encourage economic growth, because if we are into, like, for example, exports, it will help increase the GDP of the Philippines. So it will encourage economic growth, because if you will export your products to other countries, that means more sales on your part, more customers, because dili raman ka limited sa Philippines imuhang clientele. You can sell your products to persons outside the Philippines. So this will actually encourage economic growth. And then protectionism. This is another secondary purpose of taxation, to protect specific sectors or local industries. So ako yung example sa letter D ganina, di ba, exports. So we want our, actually the Philippines is encouraging the Filipinos to do export. Maunang mag-grant sila of tax incentives for those engaged in export business. But when we speak of import, so we discourage imports, right? Kaya kung mag-import ka, that means wala ni mo palit ang products prepared locally or manufactured locally. So mas gipili ni mo palit o products from other countries na gisod ni mo diri sa Philippines. So to protect the local industries, the government is imposing tax on imports para ma-discourage ka to import a product. Mas pilion na lang nimo nga mopalit sa local nga products, because there is what we call tariff duties, there is VAT on imports, and all other impositions diha sa customs. So if mag-import ka og product, ma-discourage ka because daghan ka pero may pagpapalit na lang ka sa local businesses. So that the purpose of tax, particularly sa kanang customs nga area, is to protect the local industries. So we can see here that actually the exercise of taxation is not only for the purpose of raising revenue, but it has other purposes as well. But again, ang main purpose, ang major purpose nga nung naa siya is to raise revenue to defray the necessary expenses of the government. Okay. Any questions so far, Lara? Okay, so we'll now distinguish tax from other forms of exaction. Other forms of exaction kasabot lahi nga form sa pag-collect og kwarta. Okay? And why is it important to distinguish whether ang particular collection is a tax or not? This is important, the distinction is important because lain-lain man sila og rules, di ba? Kining sa government, every time we transact with the government, di ba, na may mga fees, nasa mga fees. And then it is important for us to know whether kanibang fees nga ilang gikolekta nato, is it in the nature of a tax or not? Because lahi ang mga rules nila. Okay. So first, tax versus debt. Tax is different from a debt. So therefore, tax is not a debt. It's not an utang. The basis of tax is law. So if there is a law, authorizing the government to collect a particular tax, then pwede sila manguha og tax. Like for example, ang pinaka-basic nato nga source or basis of tax is our National Internal Revenue Code as amended. Correct? So if gigon dito sa NIRC nga the passive income, the capital gains tax is at 6%, then it will always be at 6% unless amended. So the basis of tax is the law. Okay. However, the basis of a debt is a contract or a judgment. So if you have a contract of loan, or if you have a contract and then you breached your contract, you're liable for damages. Or if you're being sued in court and the judge decided against you, so you now have a debt. So debt is based on a contract or judgment. So effect of non-payment. If you will not pay your tax, you may be imprisoned. But if you will not pay a debt, there is no imprisonment. Okay, so in your constitution, you can see there that there shall be no imprisonment for non-payment of debt. But you might ask, nganong na may mapriso sa utang karon? The pagpriso nila is not because nangutang sila, but because nangilad sila. Okay? So the basis of their imprisonment is not because of the non-payment of the debt itself, but because of their use of deceits or mga other machinations. Okay, but if you will not pay tax, even though you did not employ deceit, wala ka nangilad sa government, wala lang ka nibayad, you may be imprisoned. Mode of payment. How will you pay for tax? This is payable in money. Hindi ka pwede maingon nga, pwede, daghan magugkog ani ron sa bugas, pwede kaning usa ka sako na lang nga bugas akong ibayad? No. So, you must not pay your tax in kind. Dapat, money gyud, legal tender. For the debt, kung nakay utang, you may pay your debt in money, property, or services. So, for example, nakaiutang niya 500, pwede masahion na lang tika niya, pets na tas 500, pwede rin na, no? But for tax, you have to pay money, not property, not service, money, and in legal tender. Next, assignability. Are you able to assign your tax liability to someone else? This is not assignable. So for example, you are liable to pay tax on your income, let's say 1 million. Can you assign this tax liability to someone else nga? Ay, si Kuan na lang daw ang mubayad o BIR. Si Mr. A na lang daw ang mubayad sa akong income tax. Ni sugot raman siya. So that is not assignable. But for that, it is assignable. You can ask someone else, or someone else might pay the debt for you, and that is okay. So this is actually a case of novation. There is a change in the person of the debtor. So you can assign your debt. And then interest, there is no interest for tax unless you are already delinquent. So when we say delinquent, past due na ka, so for example, the deadline of the annual income tax return is on April 15 of the year next following your calendar year, no, end of the year. So if nibayad ka on April 20, you now have interest. You now have to pay interest. But if nibayad ka before the deadline, then there is no interest. But for that, you can actually stipulate an interest. Diba? Remember in your law subject, you can impose interest as long as it is in writing. So as long as it is in writing, you can impose interest. So for example, from January 1, nang utang siya nimo, and then ni promise siya to pay the debt on December 31. So bahalag ni pay siya before December 31, but nagbutang mo dira nga, uy, na kay interest of 10% per month. that person should pay the 10% stipulated interest per month, even if he paid on or before the deadline, which is December 31. But for tax, no interest unless delinquent. Okay, authority. This is by public authority, specifically the government. And then debt is by private individuals. Prescription. The periods are provided under NIRC. When we say prescription, ang pasabot sa prescription kay hangtod kanus akap pwede kolektahon sa isa ka butang nga wala nimo gibayaran. So for example, liable kag tax worth 1 million. Pag ang kato siya nga utang is supposedly pag 1990 pa to, 1990. But it's already 2022. Karon pa na-realize ni BIR, uy, wala di ka ni bayad sa imong 1 million pag 1990. Can the BIR still collect the 1 million from you? Pila man day ka years bago mo prescribe. Kung may kang mo prescribe, mawa ang imong utang. Ni-prescribe na, that means that ang imuhang giutangan, since nagdugay-dugay man siya og collect nimo, it's as if gi-waive na niya iyang right to collect. So the periods of prescription for taxes are provided under NIRC. We will be discussing the specific periods, kaning periods of prescription for tax in the afternoon, karong hapon, when we discuss tax remedies. For debt or utang, the prescription is provided under the new Civil Code of the Philippines. So sa Civil Code kamo tan-aw, lahi-lahi po do periods dito. So for example, if the utang is in writing, lahi o period. If it is orally lang, nagsabot ra mo orally, lahi po ang prescriptive period. But your basis will be the new Civil Code of the Philippines. But when we speak of tax, ang imong tan-awon is the National Internal Revenue Code of the Philippines. Okay. Can a tax be considered a debt? Yes, as long as it satisfies the following requirements. When it is secured by a bond, when its collection is being enforced by court action, when the tax is the subject of a compromise agreement validly entered between the government and the taxpayer, and the interest on tax delinquency is considered as interest on indebtedness. So sometimes a tax could also be considered a debt if this is the pinaka common when its collection is being enforced by a court action. So for example, wala ka ni bayad sa imong tax and then the government sued you, gikihaan ka niya, and then si judge niingon nga, yes, liable jud ka ani. So upon judgment, the tax liability becomes a debt on your part. So what is the consequence then if a certain tax is now considered a debt? The prescriptive periods for collection are now governed by the Civil Code and not the National Internal Revenue Code or the tax code. So if your tax is now considered a debt, the law that will prevail is the Civil Code and not the tax code. And then in case of appeal, if di ka mo sugot sa judgment ni court or ni judge, you have to appeal to the Court of Appeals and not the Court of Tax Appeals, because once it is already converted into a debt, mahimo naman siyang civil liability, dili naman siya tax liability. So it is governed now by the Civil Code, and you have to appeal it to the Court of Appeals, not the Court of Tax Appeals. Okay, next, distinction. Tax versus toll. Okay. First comparison is through its definition. This is enforced proportional contributions from persons and property. You can also use the most common definition of tax. This is a revenue raised by the government to defray its necessary expenses. But for toll, this is the sum of money for the use of something, which is of public nature. So toll is very specific. Tax is general. Okay, when you earn income, you get pay tax. You have to pay tax. When you sell a property, you have to pay tax. When you want to exercise your profession, when you become CPA someday and you want to exercise your profession, you need to pay tax. You need to pay your professional tax. But toll is specific. Toll is only paid for the use of something which is of public nature. Example, if you want to pass through CCLEX, di ba? Nigamit ka, niagi ka sa tulay, you are being asked to pay toll. Okay? That is toll. That is not tax. It is a toll. Okay? And then the basis is the demand of sovereignty for tax, while toll is the demand of proprietorship. So toll is in essence business or commercial in nature, proprietorship. But tax is governmental in nature. It is a demand of sovereignty. Ang purpose magud aning toll, since nigamit man ka sa property, and then pag build nila ang property, nakagastom sila dako, no? Nya, nakagamit man ka, so dapat mo bayad ka para dili sila maalkansi sa ilang gasto. The amount of tax is unlimited. There is no limit as long as, for example, if maka-decide si Congress nga imbis 12% ang VAT karon, di ba? Ang VAT nato is 12%. If maka-decide sila to increase it to 30%, is it allowed? Nga magkagdakuha sad, uy? Yes, it is allowed because the amount of tax is unlimited. However, if this is a toll, this depends upon the cost of the construction or maintenance. So there is a particular computation that should be followed in order to determine pila ang kolektahon nga toll. Dili pwede nga agi nimo dito sa CCLEX ang ipabayad sa imo is 1,000. Nya walay basis nganong 1,000. So toll we could say that the amount of toll that could be collected from us is limited. However, tax is unlimited. Okay. The authority to collect tax, this is imposed by the government. However, for toll, this may be imposed by the government or private individuals or entities. So, for example, ang kanang bridge diha sa Cebu, kinsa man ang nag-collect ana, dili man ang dili man ang government. There is a private company that collects the toll. So it may be collected by the government or private individuals or entities. But for tax, it should only be collected by the government. Private individuals or private entities have no power to collect tax. And then ang purpose of tax is to raise revenue to fund public expenditures, while the purpose of collecting a toll is the reimbursement for the costs and expenses incurred in the construction, maintenance, and operation of the tollways and assure a reasonable margin of income. So para mabawi ang inyong gasto, o aside sa mabawi, makaginan siya pagyod sila. Next, let's distinguish tax from a license fee. The purpose of tax is revenue raising, while the purpose of a license fee is regulatory. For example, if you want to renew your driver's license, gipabayad mo og certain amount, let's say 5,000. Is the 5,000 considered a tax? No, it is not a tax, but rather it is a license fee. And the purpose is to regulate. Diba? Nganong regulatory man ang purpose anang driver's license? Para ma-regulate sa government kung kinsa ra ang allowed to drive in the kanang highways and streets of the government, diba? Katurang mga qualified individuals. So only the purpose of collecting a fee for your driver's license is not actually revenue raising, but regulatory. The basis of tax is the exercise of the power of taxation, while the basis of the imposition of a license fee is the exercise of police power. The amount, again, of tax is unlimited, while the amount that could be collected as a license fee is limited to the cost of licensing, regulating, and surveillance. So, dili sila pwede mag-impose o very high license fee if they could not justify why inana ang ilahang amount. Tax, time of payment is normally paid after the start of a business. So, for example, if you will not be earning income, wala pa kay tax. Wala pa kay business, wala pa kay tax. I mean, if wala pa nimo natukod imong business, ang imong business wala pa tax, dili pa liable of tax. But license fee is normally paid before the commencement. So, before ka maka-drive, you need to pay this license fee. Before nimo magamit ang imong sakyanan, dapat nimo siya iparehistro. So, this is mura og a prerequisite before the use or conduct of a certain activity. But tax is after na. After na ka naka-income, after na ka nakahimo sa sale nimo, that's the only time that you are liable to pay tax. Effect of non-payments. If you have a business and you fail to pay tax, this will not make your business illegal. It's just that na lang kay utang tax, but your business will still be legal. However, if you will not pay a license fee, this will make the business illegal. So, for example, wala ka na kuha og business permit. Okay, a business permit is an example of a license fee. You have to pay it before starting your business operations. If you will not pay for it, this will make your business illegal. The surrender. Ang pasabot ani nga surrender if you are to surrender a property. For tax, it cannot be surrendered except for a lawful consideration. So dili pwede nga maka kuha si government o property nimo without paying you. But for a license fee, it may be with or without consideration. Especially, for example, if wala ka kuha og business permit kay kahibaw ka nga ang imong business kay illegal, kay nagluto ka dira og mga illegal drugs. So wala ka kuha og license fee, and then so it will make your business illegal. And then plus pag yun, if ma-discover sa government ang imong illegal activities, your properties there will be confiscated without consideration. Ang pasabot sa without consideration, walay bayad. So pwede nila kuhaon imong kwarta nga naa sa sulod sa imong office, kuhaon niya ang imong mga drugs, paraphernalia, mga equipment, and so on, and you will not be entitled to receive payment or consideration. Okay, so why is this important? So for example, if the government wants to take a property from you, dili ka diretso makaingon nga, uy, bayri ko for that. Okay, so you have to ask yourself, unsa man ang basis sa pagkuha ani nga property? Is it because I did not obtain a license fee? If yes, then you cannot ask for a consideration. But if this is for other purpose, for example, na ako nung iko'y utang sa government na 1 million, and then they will take my car worth 5 million, they have to pay me the difference, the 4 million. They have to pay me a consideration. But again, so that means it is taxed. The property cannot be surrendered without lawful consideration. But if the basis is the non-payment of a license fee, then you may not have the right to ask for a consideration. Okay, so please ensure to mute your mics. Okay, so to be considered a license fee, the imposition must relate to an occupational activity that so engages the public interest in health, morals, safety, and development as to require regulation for the protection and promotion of such public interest. The imposition must also bear a reasonable relation to the probable expenses of regulation. So, muna akong giingon nga ang amount that that is to be collected as a license fee has a limit, and unlike sa tax na unlimited. Excuse me, kinsa to? Please mute your mic, please. Okay. So again, a license fee has a limit while tax has no limit. Ang limit nila is dapat ilang ma-justify. Nganong inani ang ilahang collect. Ilang i-justify sa ilang cost of regulation and other costs that are related to such particular activity. Thus, a fixed amount which bears no relation at all to the cost of inspection and regulation may be held to be a tax rather than an exercise of police power. Kaya ang kanimang kong tax, you need not justify it. You need not justify it because the power of tax is unlimited. But for other exactions, for other collections, you need to justify. Okay, tax versus a penalty. So you already know the definition of tax, but penalty is a sanction imposed as a punishment for violation of a law or acts deemed injurious. So if na kayo na-violate nga provision sa law, then you have to pay a penalty. The purpose of a penalty is to regulate your conduct so that the government can make sure that kita mo follow ta sa law or else we'll get punished. The authority to collect tax is by the government, while a penalty may also be imposed by private individuals or entities. So ang penalty, ang concept of penalty is not only limited to the government, but apil pod si private persons or private companies. Then we will distinguish delinquent tax from deficiency tax. So when we speak of delinquent tax, this is actually referring to the entire amount of a tax liability that was not paid. So for example, nakay tax liability of 1 million and the entire 1 million was not really paid. So the 1 million is your delinquent tax. But for example, nakay tax nga 1 million but you only paid 800,000, the difference, the remaining unpaid portion is your deficiency tax. That's only a portion of the total tax liability that you did not pay. The need for assessment. If you have a delinquent tax, sometimes there are instances that ang kaning assessment is not anymore needed. So later this afternoon, we will discuss sa dining assessment. Dili ni siya assessment nga verb lang, oh i-assess ka, assessment. But ang assessment here is actually a noun. Noun. That is a document. Document that will be given by the BIR to you before the BIR can collect the tax. So if you have a delinquent tax, there are instances that the BIR is not anymore obligated to give you an assessment, but makaproceed na sila sa collection diretso. For deficiency tax, assessment is mandatory such that if wala mo gitagaan og assessment sa BIR and then i-collect nila ang iya, or for example, i-enforce nila ang ilang right to collect, kihaan baron mo dito sa korte, wala ka nakadawat og assessment, that act of BIR is illegal. So pwede nimo ipa-dismiss ang kaso on the ground of wala ka nakadawat sa assessment. Remedy for collection, filing of a civil action against you for deficiency tax. This may be done administratively or judicially. So here, kung delinquent tax, dapat ano jud, civil action jud. If filean jud ka og civil action sa court. But if it's only a deficiency tax, dili ra kinahanglan nga filean ka og case sa court, it could be done administratively. Administratively meaning within the office of the BIR lang. Start date of interest, diba akong gimension ganina nga, ang tax, there is no interest unless delinquent. So if delinquent na ka, then you now have to pay interest. Kanus aman mo start ug dagan ang interest? Due date of the tax. So for example, income tax, annual income tax, ang deadline is April 15. So if wala ka ni bayad on April 15, it will now start to run ang interest. Deficiency tax, the start of interest is on the date of demand by the BIR. So unsa man yung date of demand? This is when the BIR gave you the assessment. So ang kaning assessment is more siya og demand letter coming from the BIR. Additional charges, 25% surcharge, 20% interest per annum, and then compromise penalty pag yun. For deficiency tax, there is no surcharge, only interest and compromise penalty. So ang nawala lang is surcharge. And atong sabton ngano kahang walay surcharge si deficiency tax? Because in deficiency tax, you have actually paid, no, ni bayad ka. It's just that kulang ra di ay ang imong gibayad. Could be in good faith or bad faith. Depende. So for example, nagtuon lang jud ka nga sakto ang imong gibayad nga tax when in fact sayop di ay. So there will be no surcharge for you. But kaning delinquent tax, since the amount that you pay is the whole amount jud, like what jud kay gibayaran, you will be imposed a 25% surcharge. Daghan kay kag bayaran. 25%, 20%. Diri only 20% interest. Okay? So we are now able to distinguish tax from other forms of exaction. So dapat hibaw na mo whether a certain collection is a tax or a debt or a toll or a license fee or other collections, because it will your rights as the person, no, as the person nga kolektahan og kwarta, your right will depend on the nature of the exaction. If it is a tax, you have these rights. If it's not a tax, wait lang, we have a question here. Will interest and compromise penalty still be paid even if the deficiency tax is in good faith? Yes. It will still be paid even if it is in good faith. Because naalkansi naman ang government. So for example, nasayop lang jud ka nga abi nimo sakto imong collection imong kanang computation sa tax, abi nimo 800,000 ra gid imong bayaran nun. So 800,000 na jud imong gibayad. But then pag recompute sa BIR, 1 million man jud unta. So nakay kuha nga 200. So that means naalkansi si BIR og 200. So kolektahon kanila, so tagaan kanila demand letter. If they ka mo bayad, that's the only time that you will be paying interest. However, if the BIR will give you a demand and then on that same day ay sorry abi magud nako nga kaan nga sakto ako ang computation so ni bayad na kadiretso. So wala na interest because you paid on the date of the demand, there will be no interest. Okay, but if nakadawat ka og letter, dugay pa ka ni bayad, naalkansi naman gud ang government. So that money, kanang 200,000 nga kuwang nimo, this could be used for investment. Unta nila para maka-earn sila og dividends, but there is an opportunity loss on their part. That's why they will have to impose interest and compromise penalty for that. Okay, next, let's distinguish the power of taxation, police power, and eminent domain. Anyway, okay. So why is there a need for us to distinguish these three powers? So, di ba, the government has 3 inherent powers. Tulo ka buk inherent powers. When we say inherent, that means naa na dira. Naa na dayon din ha. Pag tao pa lang on the birth of the government, naa na dayon siya automatically. Tulo ka buok powers. Power to tax, then eminent domain, and then police power. And why is there a need for us to know when the government is exercising tax power, eminent domain, or police power? Because lahi-lahi siya o rights na pod nga mahatag sa atua. Okay. So for taxation, we have to remember that taxation can be exercised by the government or its political subdivisions. Kaning political subdivisions o ang kaning government, this is referring to the national government. So national government. Political subdivisions, LGUs. So ang 'di ba akong i-explain ganina that the LGUs also have the power to tax as exercised by their local sanggunian. Eminent domain is exercised by the government or its political subdivisions. Unya na pa additional. Public service companies or public utilities. So in addition to government or its political subdivisions, public service companies or public utilities can also exercise the power of eminent domain. Police power, only government or its political subdivisions. So same si tax o si police power. So for example, if there is someone collecting money from you or getting your property, you need to ask, kinsa man nga person, government ba ni siya or political subdivision or public service companies, public utilities, or private entities? So kung private entities nangolekta sa inyo ha o kwarta or nanguha og property from you, X na dayon ni silang taxation, eminent domain, o police power. They are not exercising any of these powers because kung private manggod, private entities could not exercise these 3 powers. Next, may ka nga, government daw ni, ang government. So, could be that certain government official is exercising the power of tax, eminent domain, or police power. Now, let's move on to the purpose, kanong nangolekta man sila ani. This is for the support of the government. You already know this. The eminent domain is for public use. Therefore, it must be compensated. But for police power, this is the promotion of general welfare. Therefore, this is not compensable. So, ang effect ani is, okay, government lagi ang nanguha sa imong property. Pero unsa man nga power iyang gi-exercise? If it is in the exercise of police power, o nanguha siya sa imong property, you are not allowed to be compensated. As what I have explained a while ago, no nga, if you are engaged in an illegal business, the government can confiscate property from you, and that confiscation is in the exercise of police power. Therefore, you do not have a right to say, gaay ko bayad sa property nga imong kuha from me. But for eminent domain, if pagkuha sa imong property is for the exercise of eminent domain, you must be compensated. Pasabot aning eminent domain, naa sila kuhaon nga property from you, and that property will now be converted into public use. For example, you have a land na naa sa kilid sa kalsada, and then the government is planning to have a road widening project. So, maabtan ang imuhang yuta. They will take it from you whether you like it or not. So, kuhaon nila ang portions imong yuta nga maagian sa road widening. But then, since eminent domain man siya nga power ang gi-exercise sa government ana, you have the right to be compensated. Okay, for tax, you also have the right to be compensated. Okay, persons affected, same lang. Ang effect, the money that they get from you becomes part of the public funds, diba? So when the government collects tax from us, the money that they have collected becomes part of the public funds. For eminent domain, if they will take a property from us, there is transfer of the right to property. So ang title sa property, gikan sa imong pangan, will now be transferred. Lahi na ang owner sa imong property if kuhaon siya under eminent domain. For police power, there is no transfer of title. It could either be a restraint on injurious use to property or a non-compensable destruction to property. So there is no transfer of title, but diba akong giingon for police power, this is for illegal na mga businesses, so na sila ipang-confiscate. The confiscated items will be destroyed. Will be destroyed by the government. Okay, the benefits received under taxation is assumed. So kita tanan is assumed to have received equivalent through the protection and benefits from the state. So if nagbayad kag tax, it is assumed na naka-enjoy daw ka sa benefit sa pag-collect sa tax. Even though in reality, wala jud ka wala ka naka-feel. Baka for example, sa imong lugar, guba-guba ang kalsada, ang drainage system sa inyo is bara, so sige gamay ra gani nga ulan magbaha na, wala nimo na feel ang effect sa pagbayad sa imong tax, wa ka nakadawat sa mga benefits and all. But it is assumed, no, assumed nga nakadawat daw kuno ka, naka-enjoy ka sa benefits sa pagbayad sa imong tax. And then for eminent domain, ang benefit nga imong ma-receive is the market value of the property taken. So kato kag example ganina nga, naagian imong property sa road widening project, di ba? Since it is the exercise of an eminent domain power, you have the right to ask for compensation na, uy, bayri ko ninyo sa ako ang property. So ang benefit nga imong nadawat is the market value of the property taken. For police power, we receive indirect benefits from the maintenance of a good society. So katong sa pag-confiscate sa mga illegal items, mga contraband, and then the subsequent destruction of these confiscated items, ang benefits daw nga atong nadawat is the maintenance of a good society. The amount of imposition, pila ang pwede ma-collect for tax, again, no limit. Balik-balik na ko anihang, it is a major characteristic of tax that it is unlimited. The amount is unlimited. For eminent domain, no exact amount is imposed, but instead, the owner of the property is compensated for the fair market value of such property at the time of taking. For police power, especially for license fees, ang ilang makolekta from us should not be more than sufficient to cover the cost of the license and necessary expenses. I already explained this also a while ago. Now for license fees, diba? Ang license fees is in the exercise of police power man. The amount that could be collected as a license fee is limited. Limited in a sense that the government should be able to justify, maka-reason out sila nganong inani man, because ang regulate pagbayad na mo sa regulation ani and so on, inani na siya. So mo na kaning amount ang among pangayoon na license fee. But for tax, again, that is unlimited. The power of taxation is subject to constitutional limitations, including non-impairment of contracts. Okay, so non-impairment of contracts, that means that the government has to honor its existing contracts with individuals or with companies, and they cannot increase tax in contravention with their existing contracts. So non-impairment of contracts pasabot ana is dapat dili sila mo buhat og something in breach of their contracts. For the eminent domain, this is inferior to the impairment prohibition. So that means pwede nila ma-impair ang ilahang contracts as long as it is in the exercise of eminent domain. And then police power superior to the impairment prohibition. So we need not discuss this further as long as clear sa to because tax ba ni siya nga subject at as long as clear na to ang tax nga power. Test of validity, it must not be contrary to inherent and constitutional limitations. So although tax is unlimited, it is still subject to certain limitations. Ang pasabot lang nga unlimited siya, unlimited ang amount. Unlimited ang amount. But still, we can attack the validity of tax if it contravenes the inherent and constitutional limitations. Later, atong i-discuss unsa dining inherent limitations sa tax, unsa dining constitutional limitations sa tax. Okay. So, akong example there, COCO levy funds are in the nature of taxes levied for special purpose, that is, for the rehabilitation and stabilization of the coconut industry. So, mo na ako ang giingon ganina that the purpose of taxation could be non-revenue. So non-revenue, an example will be the stabilization and rehabilitation of a specific industry. So in this case, an example is the COCO levy funds. Okay, here is the granting of 20% senior citizen discount, an exercise of police power or eminent domain. So it is an exercise of police power. So kay police power man siya, di ba, wala man tay compensation, wala tay right to ask for compensation. Naman ko ni case nga, pagpasar aning 20% senior citizen discount, nagreklamo ang mga business owners. Di ba? So for example, you are selling something at 1,000. And then here comes a senior citizen. Imbis nga 1,000 ang imong iyang bayaran, di ba naman siya 20% discount. So 800 ra iyang bayaran. Nagreklamo ang business owners nga. Alkansi kuno kaayo sila because of this 20% senior citizen discount, nakuhaan ang ilang income. That means nga mura kuno gikuhaan sila sa government og kwarta. So lingon sila nga, oy government, bayrin me sa amo ang gihatag nga 20% discount sa senior citizen. Ingon si government nga, no, you do not have a right to ask for compensation because the 20% senior citizen discount is in the exercise of police power. And we already know that when the government is exercising police power, the individual, a person, has no right to ask for a compensation. It is not compensable. So monang very important to know whether a particular imposition, kung naigpangayo si government or naigi-impose si government, is it in the exercise of tax power, eminent domain, or police power? Because magdepende ang ato ang right to ask for compensation kung unsa nga power ang iyahang gi-exercise. Okay. Next, theory and basis of taxation. So nganong naa mag-gyud taxation? And why is it an inherent power? Kung kag inherent power, di ba akong giingon kanina, because by the mere fact na there is a government, automatic na siya right to tax or power to tax. Therefore, bisan pa og walay constitution, wala na ang 1987 constitution. Let's say wa jud nahitabo nga naay constitution. Wala say laws. By the mere fact of the existence of a government, the government itself already has the power to tax. So the power of taxation is not dependent on the existence of a law. Nya, mga tanong niya, miss, ingon makaganina na ang basis of tax is law. Ang pasabot na ko atong basis of tax is law is the actual tax amount. So kung kag 6%, kung sa may basis nimo na ay tax law, ana. So kantong specific nga tax, kung unsa nga tax, kinsay gitaksan or unsa nga mga activities ang gitaksan, ang basis ana is law. But the exercise of the power to tax nga, oy, na ako'y right to tax, that is inherent. It does not need a law. It does not need the constitution. With the mere existence or birth of the government, automatic na siya power to tax. So what is the basis then? Anong naamay power of taxation si government? Pinakasikat is the lifeblood theory. Lifeblood theory. Taxes are the lifeblood of the government, without which it can neither exist nor endure. Without money, the government cannot deliver services to the people or function and serve the people. The importance of this theory can be manifested by, later na. So kanilang sa, taxes are the lifeblood of the government. So we can picture out government as a human being. So si government mo siya tao. Kung wala siya dugo, mamatay siya, di ba? Or kung ni-exist man gani siya pag first, dili siya maka-endure sa iyang existence. Eventually, mamatay siya. So without taxes, the government will die. Because imagine, if ang government dili mag-collect og taxes, asa man siya manguha og pangbayad sa mga tao, pangpalit og mga supplies, pangpalit og equipment. So dili siya maka-deliver sa ihang services to the people. So ang basis of taxation is that taxes are the lifeblood of the government. So this theory is what we call the lifeblood theory. Nga unsa may implication, o sige kasabot nako nga ang taxes di ay lifeblood of the government. Unsa may implication or unsa may effect ani? First, there is prohibition against set-off of taxes. Diba? So in your law on obligations and contracts, you have different modes of saan siya? Atong palarecon na ninyo, di ba? So payment, losses, remission, and so on. So set off is compensation, di ba? Compensation meaning nakoy utang nimo, naasad kay utang nako, quits na ta. So mo nang set off, di ba? So since taxes are not debts, di ba? Atong na-learn ganina, ang tax dili siya utang. So it could not be subject to set off or compensation nga, legal compensation. Compensation dili pasabot salary ha, compensation katong sa inyong oblikon ba, compensation or set off. So for example, ikaw na kay utang nga tax ni government worth 1 million. Niyon niya, si government nasa siya utang nimo because kuan man, for example, naa kay na overpay ka og tax sa una, nangayo kag refund. So si government na siya i-refund mo, ikaw naa sa kay hatagonon nga tax niya. Pwede ba ka mayon nga, oy government, oy PRR, napa makahitaganan gud nga refund nako 500,000. O niya ako naa sa kay hatagonon nimo nga tax nga 1 million. Pwede 500,000 na lang ako ang ihatag nimo. Anyway, namo koy dawat todo nimo nga 500. So i-set off na lang nako. Is that allowed? No. No, because taxes are the lifeblood of the government. Tax is not a debt. Dili siya debts. It is not subject to set off. Or for example, especially kanang kung 1 million imong refundable nga kuwaon sa iyaha, nya 1 million sa nimo hatagan ni BIR mo ka, ay dili na lang ko mabayad nimo nya, ayaw na lang sa ko refund kay. Set off na, quits na. Okay, bye. So dili na siya pwede, okay? Because taxes are the lifeblood of the government. So the government should always collect tax from you, even if sila mismo wala siya ni hatag sa iyang obligation mo. Okay? Kay katong kung obligation ni government nimo, that is in the nature of a debt. Na utang si government nimo. Ikaw nakahatagonon niya, but that is not technically considered a debt, it is a tax. So you cannot withhold it from the government. Di ka pwede mingon nga, ay di lang na ako ibayad mo. Because you always have to go back to your lifeblood theory. Next, another implication of the lifeblood theory is the injunction rule against tax collection. Kasabot ang injunction is stop. Ipa-stop nimo ang collection. For example, okay, ikaw na kay utang 1 million nga tax. Wa mo jud ka ni bayad. So gisendan ka og assessment, wag gyapon ka ni reply sa ilang assessment, tagaan na kag final demand, wala gyapon ka, wala ra. Wala nimo gimain. And then, eventually, gikihaan ka ni BIR. Nag-filean ka niya og case dito sa Regional Trial Court. And then, si court, ningon siya nga, naagyud ni siya utang. Okay? So, if di siya mabayad, sige BIR, kuha ato ang iyahang property. Naato siya yuta dito somewhere sa kaning specific area. So, kuha na siya. And then, all of a sudden, din ka, uy, dili pwede. So, ni-file ka og injunction. Basabot sa injunction is, you want to stop BIR from collecting tax from you. So, that is not allowed. Injunction is not allowed for tax cases. Injunction is not allowed. Why? Lifeblood theory. Because taxes are the lifeblood of the government. You cannot stop the BIR from collecting tax from you. And then presumption of correctness of assessments. So based on the lifeblood theory, if sendan ka og assessment sa BIR, ingon dito sa assessment na napakay kuwang nga 5 million nga tax. If you will not answer the assessment will be presumed correct. So if ma-presume siya correct, and then elapse na ang time for you to answer, it will now be final. Final and executory. You cannot question it anymore. So it is presumed to be correct because of the lifeblood theory. Okay? Another theory as basis of taxation is necessity theory. So more siya o branch out lang sa lifeblood, di ba? May mga lifeblood. Taxes are the lifeblood of the government. Therefore, taxes are necessary. Diba? Kailangan siya. Pero ang lifeblood theory and necessity theory is, separate lang sila nga theories. But eventually, if you think about it, ang necessity theory is more siya of branch sa lifeblood theory. The existence of the government is a necessity. So ang gitanaw diri sa necessity theory is not the tax itself, but the government. Ang government daw kay necessary. So dito sa lifeblood theory, ang tanaw niya nga, unsa importante ang tax. Tax kay importante because without it, the government will not function. Lifeblood theory. Ang necessity theory, dili si tax ang na-spotlight, but si government. Si government ang na-spotlight. The existence of the government is a necessity. So kailangan man jud ka nato na ay government, di man ta mahimo, di man ta mabuhi daw kung walay government. Therefore, atong suportahan ang government because it cannot continue without means to support itself. Mubayad ta og tax para mabuhi pa si government. Kasi government is a necessity. Koha? And then another basis is the benefits received theory, or also known as the doctrine of symbiotic relationship. So benefits received theory, murag friends with benefits. Kita ko no, o si government, friends. And then we receive benefits from each other. So the government and the people have reciprocal and mutual duties of support and protection to one another. Support and protection. We are the ones giving the government support through our taxes, and in return, we expect protection from the government. So we give the government support, and then the government will give us protection. But then, again, ako na mention kanina, actual receipt of benefit is not necessary. So dili necessarily nga nakadawat jud tinuura ka sa protection sa government. Pwede gihapon wala ka nakadawat because again, akong i-mention kanina, we are assumed to have received the benefits even if in reality wala gid ka nakadawat sa benefit. Therefore, no one is allowed to object or resist the payment of taxes solely because no personal benefit to him can be pointed out. So akong example ganina, you live in a place where the roads are not fixed or what your roads at all, no, kung mag-uwan lapo kaayo, way taro nga drainage system and so on. But pwede ba ka moingon nga di lang ko mobayad og tax mo aram gihapon no, pwede nadawat nga benefits? No. Okay? No. You do not have the right to resist or object the payment of taxes solely because wala ka nakadawat o personal benefit. As the benefits nga atong madawat daw from the exercise of taxation is already assumed. The benefit received by government need not be rendered by government need not be commensurate across all taxpayers, because it says here daw it is also impossible on the part of the government nga ma-ensure niya nga ang benefit nga dawat nako same sa benefit nga nadawat nimo. Lisod man siya. So gi-assume na lang jud nga kita tanan nakadawat sa benefit. Okay. Any questions so far? Wala ra. Jurisdiction over subject and objects. Tax is territorial in character. Territorial in character. A state cannot tax anything not within its jurisdiction. So territorial in character. So ang tax dili siya makalabang, dili siya maka-cross beyond the territory. So for example, I'm in Tacloban man karon. So I'm now in Tacloban. So naay LGU Tacloban, right? Naa siya isang gunian diri. So si isang gunian diri sa Tacloban or the city council, they can impose taxes. No, they can pass an ordinance imposing a specific tax. So kana nga ordinance sa city council diri sa Tacloban will only be kung tao pa na si tax, maglakaw-lakaw siya, magdagandagan siya diri ra jud sa Tacloban. Kung maabot siya dito sa border Tacloban Palo, dili na siya makalabang. So kadto nga tax dili ra gyud sa Tacloban. Dili na to pwede imposan of the same tax dito sa lahi nga LGU. Tax is territorial in character. So my example is with respect to a local tax, local na tax. How about national tax? VAT, example VAT. VAT is a national tax, no? It is imposed anywhere within the Philippines, as long as you are entering into a vatable transaction. So na VAT. If mulabang kadto, let's say, 'di ba, Palawan is very dito sa pinakaubos gyud sa Mindanao, 'di ba, dool na kay sila sa Brunei dito. Pwede ba siyang mulabang si VAT dito sa Brunei? Dili pwede. Ari ra gyud siya sa Philippines. Mo bitaw nang if mag-export ka na kay product diri, imo i-export sa lain nga country, 'di ba? Zero rated siya, walay VAT, zero rated kay dili man pwede mulabang. Di man pwede mulabang si VAT sa lain nga territory because tax is territorial in character. So the taxing power of the state does not extend beyond its territorial limits. Thus, if an interest in property is taxed, the situs of either the property or interest must be found within the state. So for example, if you have real estates all around the Philippines, of course, you are liable to pay real property tax. But if ang imong property na sa US, ang katong property nimo sa US will not be imposed tax here in the Philippines. You are not liable to pay real property tax for those properties. Okay, wala naman siya sa Philippines. But it could be nga naa kay tax bayran but dito na sa US wantay labot ana. But the tax na gi-impose sa government diri sa Philippines is only for those subjects and objects within the Philippines as well. If an income is taxed, the recipient thereof must have a domicile within the state or the property or business out of which the income is earned. Must be situated within the state so that the income may be said to have a situs therein. So later, actually, we will discuss the specific situs of specific subjects or objects. So, but in general, if ang income ko no na-earn diri sa Philippines, if ang income, if ang income na-earn diri sa Philippines and enjoyed by the person that is domiciled or living here in the Philippines, then the Philippine income tax applies. Okay, so for example, let's say a non-resident alien is here in the Philippines, currently here in the Philippines, and he is earning income outside the Philippines. Since the income is earned outside of the Philippines, it will not be taxed here. So the Philippine income tax will not be applicable. Okay, personal property. Personal property may be separated from its owner and he may be taxed on its account at the place where the property is, although it is not the place of the kung ano siya, owner's own domicile. And even though he is not a citizen or resident of the state which imposes the tax. So, ang personal property daw is having a different status. So, kung naka-personal property, o sige, other terms of personal property, movable property. So, example, car, may lain movable properties, mga vehicles, any other things nga, you can move from one place to another. So, since it may be separated from the owner daw, for example, ako na kay car, nasa Cebu, niya ako kay na ako diri sa Tacloban. So, since ma-separate man siya from the owner, ang tax on such personal property is imposed on the place where the property is found, regardless kung asa ang domicile ni owner. Okay, so kung ano siya, ang importante lang timanan is tax is territorial in character. Okay, next we proceed to the principles of a sound tax system. Principles of a sound tax system. Kung sa'yo pasabot sa sound tax system. When you say sound tax system, meaning nindot nga tax system. So kung kaning principles of a sound tax system is followed, kung ma-follow ni siya tanan, that means nindot ang tax system sa kana nga country or kana nga place. So we can look at these principles as mere guides. Guide lang sila, no nga. Kung ganahan ka nindot imong tax system, dapat naa kaaning tulo. But for example, if a certain tax system is not following these principles of a sound tax system, does it mean nga illegal ang ilang tax system? No. Dili. The non-usage or non-compliance of these principles of a sound tax system does not mean that the tax system itself is illegal. It's just that dili lang siya sound tax system. Okay? Kaya kani siya mere guides lang. Dili ni siya requirements for legality. Okay? I hope that's clear. So what are these principles? So remember FAT. So para nindot daw ang tax system, dapat FAT siya. Dapat tambok siya. Okay, F. F refers to fiscal adequacy. A for administrative feasibility and T for theoretical justice. So fiscal adequacy, kung sa di pasabot ani, ganahan ka nga nindot imong tax system, dapat na siya F. Fiscal adequacy. Revenue raised must be sufficient, not excessive, not deficient, to meet government or public expenditures and other public needs. So para makaingon daw kuno ka nga nindot ang imuhang tax system, dapat ang imuhang makolekta no sa imuhang in the form of taxes must be sufficient. Kung ingkang sufficient, dili siya sobra kaayo, dili sad siya kuwang. Sakto lang. Okay? Sakto lang. Dapat ang imuhang makolekta ng taxes from the person sojourning within your area or within the territorial jurisdiction must be sufficient to meet, to meet the government expenditures. Kaya diba, ang purpose man sa tax is to defray the necessary expenses of the government. So if kuwangan imuhang tax, wrong na din kani, wala kay fiscal adequacy. So para nindot, para sound ang imuhang tax system, you must meet this principle, fiscal adequacy. Kung may kag fiscal manggod, ano siya di sabot ninyo sa fiscal? Fiscal meaning something pertaining to money, correct? So, the adequacy, adequate, sakto, enough. Enough ang kwarta, fiscal adequacy. Okay? Dapat enough ang kwarta nga makolekta in form of taxes para magamit sa government. Okay, let's say check na. Let's proceed to A. Administrative feasibility. This is capable of being effectively administered and enforced with the least convenience. So, ang administrative feasibility refers to the manner of collecting tax. Giun sa pagkolekta ang tax. Kung hassle kaayo, wrong na din kas administrative feasibility. O for example, no, let's say ang pagkolekta sa tax, example ni hadili ni mo ang hitabo sa Philippines. So, example ang pagkolekta sa tax is ipa-house to house ni mo ang taga BIR. Manuktok dito, excuse me, due na day inyong tax karon. Palihog niya kung bayad. Nya, proceed na po sa next nga balay. Manuktok na po sila dito. Kaya ang collection sa tax is hassle, no? Inconvenient. So wrong na din ka there is administrative feasibility. So mo na nang karon, 'di ba? Kaning sa BAR, pwede na ka mag-pay sa mong tax online. Pwede ka mag-pay tax online. Di na kang kailangan sa una, kung dili pa pwede mo bayad og tax online, maglinyahay na sila taas kay linya kung ting due date sa tax, taas kay linya sa BIR or sa authorized agent banks, AABs. Kaya pwede man ka mobayad sa BIR itself, directly silang office, pwede sa mga authorized agent banks. So sa BPI, sa BDO, or other banks, kung time nating ting bayad, taas kayo linya. So medyo inconvenient. So karon at least nanay online. So that means that BIRDI is looking at administrative feasibility. The collection of tax must be capable of being effectively administered and enforced. So ato dang i-assess. There is a Philippines, feel ninyo, nabatay fiscal adequacy? Yes or no? In your opinion, in your observation, do you think we have fiscal adequacy? Ang ato ang tax system here in the Philippines, do you think complies with fiscal adequacy? Di daw. Let me hear your thoughts. Chat lang. No? Why do you say so? No. Sama na yung basis. No kay ga-deficit. Nga nung nakaingon mong kang ga-deficit, how can you say na deficit siya? Correct. Correct. Latest news sa DOF, pangutang, countries in debt. Correct. No, correct. Because if ni-follow unta sa kaning first principle nga F, no, fiscal adequacy, that means sufficient unta ang kwarta, dili na kailangan mangutang. So therefore, ato ang tax system wrong na dayon no, sa number 1. Wrong na dayon sa number 1. Number 2, what do you think? Is there administrative feasibility sa ato ang tax system? Well, there are also naman sa mga taxes. And di ba daghan man og mga taxes, no? Daghan man ta og mga kinds of taxes. There are taxes that could be collected with the least inconvenience. There are also taxes nga medyo hassle ra gihapon siya bayaran. So it actually depends on the kind of tax. But overall, I could say that we are achieving this administrative feasibility, especially with the aid of so especially with the aid of the internet nowadays. So actually, in my case, Di ko ganahan sa una, di mo ko ganahan malinya sa BIR. Kunya, okay na AABs, mga authorized agent banks. Pero mahasulan rin gihapon ko kay kuan man, introvert man ko, di mo ko ganahan masurang ko daghan tao nga, daghan kay masturyaan nga mga tao. So at least, karon yes, pwede na GCash or any other online payment platforms, pwede na jud siya. So I could say nga medyo check tani administrative feasibility. This is also very much convenient for us introverts. Now we can just pay our tax without speaking with any government official. And then if mo to pa siya mo BIR, medyo mainit ulo dito sa mga kuan BIR na employees. So di ko ganahan. So at least karon na ano online. So yes, check tani administrative feasibility. May na lang, no? Yes. So that's what I said a while ago na ingon diri real property, you have to go sa City Hall. Yes, nagdepende rin gihapon sa kind of tax that you are paying. So perhaps some of the taxes are not yet ready for online payments, but I really think na in the future eventually kaning mga taxes ma-online na jud siya, most of them. And then DST kaning documentary stamp tax, for example, you want to have your document stamped with DST, mo-order gihapon ka sa City Hall, palit ka dito og DST, imong papilit dira sa imong document. So medyo hassle lang gihapon siya nga part, pero at least ikaw ka mo palit dito, then imong i-paste sa imong document for the doc stamp tax. Anyway, but I think we are achieving this naman, administrative feasibility. And lastly, theoretical justice. So para ang imong tax system could be considered sound, it must have this T, theoretical justice. So what does this mean? It must take into consideration the taxpayer's ability to pay. So basta theoretical justice gani, automatic mosud sa atong mind dapat is ability to pay principle. Dapat unta ang taxes daw will be based on your capacity or ability to pay. So kung mas daghan og income, dapat mas daghan og tax. Not really daghan og tax in quantity. Mas dako og tax liability. Unya, kung mas gamay kag income, dapat mas gamay ang imong tax liability. Example, ang kaning VAT. Okay, VAT. Pila gani ang percentage of VAT ron? Diba? 12%. Let's say, a very rich man, let's say, earning 5 million or 20 million every month. Mupalit siya og cellphone na VAT. Diba? VAT is 12%. Ikaw, kuan ka, so lang, pero sosyalera ka, parehas mo gipalit og phone. Palit mo og pinakamahal nga iPhone. Parehas mong duha. So, si rich man, or because si so man, same mo og phone nga gipalit. The very rich man has to pay VAT, diba? Kay tanan ninyo sa resibo, baka bantay mo, mananaw ba mo resibo? Tanan ninyo sa inyong resibo, there's ubos na there. Subtotal, and then VAT, 12%, then total, correct? So VAT is 12%. For the very rich man, VAT is 12%. For the so man, buying the same unit or the same brand of cell phone, 12% ra gihapon iyang VAT. Correct? So ang subtotal nila same. VAT 12% same. Ang total na jud nga bayro nun the same. So there is no distinction between rich, poor, or so. So ang kaning VAT is not based on the taxpayer's ability to pay. Do you agree? So VAT is not based on the taxpayer's ability to pay. How about income tax? Income tax, depende. Diba, income tax is broad, very, very broad si income tax. You have different types of income tax. So when you say income tax, usa na na siya kind of tax. But you have to break it down further, Pachod. Income tax is still broad. You have to branch it out. So income tax is the umbrella niya. So ana na atay compensation, no? Tax on compensation. Next, tax on business income. Corporate tax. You have your passive income tax. Nya kana pa yung passive income tax, daghan pa yung nagklase, no, na ay tax on earnings, na ay tax on prizes and winnings, tax on interests, dividends, diba? Dividend tax. You have your tax on interest on foreign currency deposit systems. You have your capital gains tax on sale of capital assets. So daghan kaayog income tax. Ang akong maingon nga based sa ability to pay is the tax on compensation, no? So the higher your salary is, the higher your income tax rate, diba? If you are to look at your income tax table, section 24, section 24 sa NIRC, you can see there a tax table. Then makita ninyo dito 200,000 ba to or 250? So if you are earning that much for a particular year total, you have no tax. If ni-exceed ka gamayan na, but then wala ka ni-exceed sa katong next nga bracket, then your tax rate is this much. Kakabantay mo, magkadako imuhang sweldo, magkadako ang imong tax. So the tax on compensation is an example of a tax based on the taxpayer's ability to pay. So naay theoretical justice sa kana nga part. But for all other taxes, no, same lang, fixed in your rate, no, fixed rate. So for theoretical justice unta, if we are to follow this, tax must be uniform and equitable. Uniform pasabot, all taxable articles or kinds of property of the same class shall be taxed at the same rate, and it is also equitable based on the taxpayer's ability to pay, and all those who are similarly situated should be taxed similarly. So again, kaning CFAT are only guidelines or principles. Therefore, the non-compliance of the following principles does not ipso facto render a tax law void or invalid. So even if, so for example, no, kato akong giingon ganina, si VAT is not based on taxpayers' ability to pay, because regardless if you are rich, you are middle class or poor, no, you still have to pay 12% VAT. So it does not comply with theoretical justice. But can you say nga, oy, dili man din siya, hindi siya di-comply sa theoretical justice. Void ni ang ato ang VAT law. Void. Sakto ba? Dili. Because even if VAT law is not in compliance with theoretical justice, it does not ipso facto render a tax law void or invalid. So para kung ganahan jud ka i-assail ang validity of a tax law, tan-aw nimo siya in relation to a constitutional precept or principle. So para ma-void, ganahan ka if avoid din ako nga tax bi, murag hassle kay ni siya or feel na ko dili jud ni siya justifiable nga tax. So if ganahan ka mo assail sa validity, you have to look at the inherent limitations and the constitutional limitations. You cannot use the principles of a sound tax system as basis for your questioning of the validity of a tax law. Kung ganahan ka mo question sa validity of a tax law, do not use the principles of a sound tax system, but rather you have to use these inherent and constitutional limitations on taxation. Because if a certain tax law violates any of the inherent and constitutional limitations, then you may assail the validity of the tax law. Pwede ka mo file a case in court asking the court to declare the tax law unconstitutional or void. Okay, so let's discuss first. Wala na may question sa principles of a sound tax system. So let's discuss first inherent limitations. So para di mo makalimot, mo na, kamo na sulti. So ako ang mnemonic. But that is my mnemonic for inherent limitation. Kung kuan rated as PG ra kayo siya ninyo, pwede ra snipe, SNIPE, or anything you want. Basta kanilang ako para makinamdam jud ko, no? So PENIS. So there are only 5 inherent limitations. If you will encounter a question baron sa inyong board exam, asking you to determine whether this is an inherent limitation or a constitutional limitation, all you need to do is to remember PENIS. So if it is not PENIS, that means it is a constitutional limitation because mas dali man gud i-memorize. Ang inherent, there are only 5. But constitutional limitations is very, very long, daghan kayo siya. So mas dali timan-an si inherent. Okay? PENIS. So let's start with P. Public purpose. So tax must be for a public purpose. If the collection of a tax is not for a public purpose, then you can assail the validity of the tax, or that tax law is void. For example, a tax imposed on certain individuals for the let's say for the Christmas party of the BIR employees. Purpose is Christmas party, to finance the Christmas party of the BIR employees. Pabayaron yung tax para sa inyong Christmas party. So I will assail the validity of this tax because it is not for a public purpose. Tax is considered for a public purpose if it is for the welfare of the nation, if it affects the area as a community rather than as individuals. It is designed to support the services of the government. So how to test whether ang purpose tax is public purpose or not? First is the duty test. Is it the duty of the government to finance this particular purpose? Or is it for the promotion of general welfare? Okay, so you have 2 tests, duty test and promotion of general welfare. So in my example, if nag-collect sila of tax for the purpose of financing the Christmas party of the BIR employees, first test, duty test. Is it the duty of the government to finance the Christmas party of the BIR employees? No. So hagbong na siya daan-ana. And ang Christmas party of the BIR employees, is it for the promotion of the general welfare? No. So it is not for a public purpose. Therefore, you can assail the validity of that specific tax law. Next is E, exemption. Okay, exemption from taxation of government entities. So the government itself is exempt from tax. Why do you think so? Kay kung iyang taxan iyang self, it's just like getting money from the other pocket and then putting it to the other pocket. Namura gibalhin ra nimo gikan sa imong pikas bulsa padung sa imong lain nga bulsa. So si government will not anymore tax itself. Imor siya gadua-dua. Oy, gai ko niya padung ra dig hapon siya sa government fund. So dili siya mo make sense. So exemption from taxation, government is exempt from tax. Exemption when it chooses to tax itself. So kung ganahan lang yun siya. Like for example, kaning mga GOCCs. Let's say let's say si SSS. If mo pass og law si Congress specifically taxing SSS, then it is allowed. It is part of the exemption when it chooses to tax itself. Let's say MCWD. MCWD there in Cebu, it is a GOCC and it is also taxable based on the law passed by Congress, specifically saying that MCWD is taxable. So actually, ang nahitabo gyud diri sa Philippines is that for government agencies performing governmental functions, they are exempt unless expressly taxed. But for those performing proprietary functions, they are taxable unless expressly exempted. So, akong example ganina, si MCWD, di ba? Si MCWD is performing proprietary functions, mano kay more man siya mahug na business siya. So, taxable unless expressly exempted. But kaning mga performing governmental functions like let's see, LTO or BIR. So BIR is performing governmental functions. Wala man siya nag-business. So that is exempt. So for agencies performing governmental functions, they are exempt unless expressly taxed. Taxability of the instrumentalities of the government. Diba, lahi man ang national government o ang LGU. Nya, akong i-mention ganina nga, ang LGU sad, naa sila'y taxing power as exercised by their sanggunian. So, if there is an agency of the national government that has an office within the LGU cannot tax that instrumentality of the government. So, for example, here in Tacloban, naamantay ko andiri regional trial courts, natay municipal trial courts. Pwede ba moingon si sanggunian ni diri ni Tacloban, mingon siya nga, oy, mga courts, bayadi mininyo og tax kay nag-earn ba mo income sa inyong mga filing fees o ansuon nga mga pangbayaron sa court. Pwede ba na? No, it cannot be taxed by the LGU. Okay. Taxability of GOCCs. GOCCs, general rule taxable, exception na adjude in special laws, specifically exempting them, GSIS, SSS, PhilHealth, and local water districts. Okay, that is for E, exemption from taxation. So that means that if there is a law specifically taxing a government, you may assail the validity of it because it violates letter E, one of the inherent limitations, exemption from taxation of government entities. So in my example a while ago, if si LGU Tacloban imposes a tax on the regional trial courts here in Tacloban, the judges may assail the validity. Pwede nila ipavoid ang katunga ordinance because that is in contravention with the second inherent limitation. Now, let's move on to the next one. N, non-delegable. Cannot be delegated, non-delegable. Because, diba, we go back to the very basic definition of taxation. This is exercised by the sovereignty through its law-making body. As explained a while ago, it is Congress that exercises the power of taxation. General rule, it must be exercised by Congress. It is inherently legislative in nature. Therefore, it cannot delegate this power to someone else. Dili pwede bingon si Congress, pwede ikaw na lang maghimo og tax law. Kapoy man, dili pwede. It's non-delegable. It is the legislature that determines the cones of the tax. Say cones. Coverage, object, nature, extent, and situs. So, si Congress, siya ang mo-determine kung kinsa man ang taxan. Unsa man na nga tax, unsa pangan ani nga tax. Asa man ni siya i-impose nga tax. Pila man ang tax rate. So, kanin sila tanan must be determined by the Congress, by the legislature, because it is a non-delegable power. Exception, there are 5 permissible delegations. So as a general rule, diba, this is non-delegable. It should be exercised by Congress. Therefore, if dili si Congress ang nagpasar ani nga tax law, you can assail the validity of the tax law because it's not Congress ang naghimo. Exception, again, 5 permissible delegations. Petal. Okay, petal. Delegation to the people through initiative and referendum. So in our 1987 Constitution, the people is granted the right to initiate or to pass a law. Ay, ganahan mi nga namin ani nga law. But for of course no kaning tax law, of course dili kit o ikaw as part of the people, di ba? Di ta ganahan na mo pass og tax law, no? But in theory, we are allowed to do so. Uy, ganahan mi mataxan. Dili na pwede. But we can actually make an initiative, petition for initiative. Let's say if you want to reduce a specific tax, pwede. No, for example, di mi ganahan nga 12% ang VAT, ganahan mi 5% lang or 10% lang, di ba? Kaysa Australia, ang ilang VAT dito is only 10% o ganahan mi 10% lang, bukat ra kayo ang 12. So if you want, you can actually start a petition for initiative, through initiative and referendum. But nalang ni siya specific requirements when it comes to number of signatures. And then emergency powers to the president. So the president can exercise certain legislative powers in times of emergency. So if Congress will announce a state of emergency, then the Congress can also pass a special law granting the president some emergency powers. And then tariff powers to the president. There is a provision there in our Constitution, and there is also a special law for that, giving the president the power to determine tariff rates. And why is this so? Because, di ba, kung ipaagi pa nimo siya sa Congress, hinamdo mo sa procedure naman siguro may policy nga subject, no? Procedure sa pagpass og law is dugay. So, for example, ani ka sa originating house, let's say si Senate ang first, magi para siya first reading, second reading, third reading. After makapasar sa third reading, ihatag na dito sa other house. So, ito siya sa House of Representatives. Mo go through na po siya of first reading, second reading, third reading, and then after ana, i-add na dito sa president for signature. Dugay pa kaayo. And then, ang kanimong tariff rates is subject to, kung siya ba, volatile, constantly changing. Dapat mo change siya in accordance with the movement sa market o the status baron sa atong importations. So, kailangan siya pas-pas i-change ang rates. So, manang, ato na lang na siyang i-delegate sa president pero di na muagi sa first reading, second reading, third reading. Si president na lang ang mag-determine. So, that is a permissible delegation of power to tax to the president. And then, to administrative agencies. So, ang administrative agencies can expand a specific law. So, for example, na ay law, there ang general ra kaayo. And then, the administrative agencies can fill in the details. So, yes. So, sa una, actually, ang VAT na to is 10% lang. And then, Congress passed a law stating VAT shall be increased to 12% if the following conditions are already present. So, the determination of the conditions, whether exist na ba nga mga conditions, was left to the determination of the administrative agencies. And then, si administrative agencies na ang niingon nga, oy, mag 12% VAT na ta. And then, another permissible delegation is to the LGUs. As what I have mentioned, ang LGU can exercise the power to tax through its council or its sanggunian. Okay. So that is N. Then we go to T, International Committee. This refers to the respect accorded by nations to each other because they are sovereign equals. Thus, the property or income of a foreign state may not be the subject of taxation by another state. Respetaray lang. Okay, respetaray lang mo ng International Committee. Example, di ba, na may embassy, there is a Philippines, sa sulod sa Philippines, may US Embassy, correct? Ang kanang US Embassy, naaman sila yuta, dira, na sila yuta, nga gitukuran silang office. Question, can you impose a real property tax on the land over which the office of the US Embassy is situated? Answer kay no. Because of respect, because of international committee. We do not tax each other. Oy, you are another state, I am another state. Let's not tax each other. So in the same way, na at the Philippine Embassy dito sa US, no, the US also will not impose taxes on the Philippine Embassy. They will respect each other. So if there is a law specifically asking tax from a foreign state, that may be assailed. The validity of that law may be assailed. And then situs or territory. Taxation may be exercised only within the territorial jurisdiction of the taxing authority. So as what I have mentioned a while ago, ang tax, dili siya pwede mo cross ato ang border. So it should follow the proper situs or territory. Okay, so muna siya ato ang mga inherent limitations. So P, public purpose. E is for exemption from taxation of government entities. N is non-delegable or non-delegability. I is international committee, and S is for situs or territorial. Okay, so that is for inherent limitations. And then we now, any questions on inherent limitations? Let's have a short water break lang sa 5 minutes. Okay, let's continue. Let's now proceed with the constitutional limitations. So let's just go over these very briefly lang, and I will just point out those which I think are very much important for the CPA licensure exam, as well as for your upcoming part 2 exam. Okay, so first, we have the prohibition against imprisonment for non-payment of poll tax. So a while ago, I mentioned that non-payment of tax could lead to imprisonment, except for poll tax. So, unsa ning poll tax? Poll tax is the basic community tax under the local government code. So, kanang sedula, di ba naman tayo 5 pesos nga basic community tax for each person? So, if you will not pay it, wala, dili ka ma-preso for that. Okay? Basis is this one, Article 3, Section 20 of the 1987 Constitution. So since these are constitutional limitations, atong basis ani is the 1987 Constitution. Next is uniformity and equality of taxation. Uniformity meaning same class must be same rate. Equality rather, it must be equitable, meaning it must be based on the taxpayer's ability to pay. So, to address this kaning equitable nga requirement, dapat unta progressive rates. Kung may progressive rates, the higher the income, the higher should be your tax. But the question is, does the Constitution prohibit regressive taxes? Answer is no. What it simply provides is that Congress shall evolve a progressive system of taxation. It doesn't say nga, dapat progressive system jud tanan. Ingon ra diri nga, si Congress shall evolve. So if there is regressive taxes, can you assail its validity on the ground nga it's not equitable? Answer kay no. Because again, ang giingon lang ni Constitution is Congress shall evolve a progressive system of taxation. What does it mean when you say evolve? It just means that their taxes are preferred and indirect taxes should be minimized. This is a mere directive, not a justiciable right. So meaning, kung ano siya mura o giingnan ra siya nga, mas prefer if in ani. But if dili mahimo, okay ra pod. Next is grant by Congress of the authority to the President to impose tariff rates. So as part, di ba na-discuss na to ganina sa ato inherent limitations pod as part of the permissible delegation sa atong petal, no? Petal. So dito sa T, tariff rates to the President. Duha ang basis ana, the Constitution, Article 6, and the flexible tariff clause of Section 1608 of the Customs Modernization and Tariff Act. Prohibition against taxation. Oh, this one is very important. This one is very important. So I highlight na ninyo. Prohibition against taxation of religious, charitable, and educational institutions. So religious, charitable, and educational. So ang kaning prohibition against taxation, ang pasabot nila ani is only real property taxes. Real property taxes ang ilang pasabot ana. Nga prohibition nga dili daw pwede taksan si religious, charitable, and educational institutions. It covers real property taxes only. And there is a requirement. Dapat ang property is actually directly and exclusively used for, so kung religious ka nga institution, for religious purposes. Kung charitable ka nga institution, for charitable purposes. And kung educational ka nga institution, for educational purposes. So dapat ADE, actually, directly, and exclusively used. Because if it is not exclusively used for, let's say, educational purposes, then this prohibition against taxation is not applicable. For example, USC. Let's say si USC, diba, ang kanina nga prohibition against taxation only for real property tax. Let's say si USC has, diba, siya mga kuan, mga yuta, and then one of its parcel of land, let's say, is okay, being used to kuan, being used, dito na lang sa Talamban, di ba, naamantay dorm dito sa Talamban. So, ang kanang dormitory, di ba, pabayaron man mo ana o kanang renta sa dormitory. So, ang kanang dormitory, that is not for educational purpose, correct? It's actually for business purpose. So, this exemption will not apply. Ang portion sa yuta nga gigamit for business purposes, that is not part of this exemption. Therefore, USC has to pay real property taxes on those parcels of land that are not actually directly and exclusively used for educational purposes. Okay? So, kani siya kapila na ninigawas as a theory question, no? So, atong tan-awon ang here. Rules on taxation on non-stock, charitable, and religious organizations. So, kani siya nga basis sa Article 6 sa Constitution. This only covers real property taxes. However, if you dive in deeper, napa dito sa NIRC other exemptions for these charitable and religious organizations. For income tax, generally they are exempt from tax, but the basis is not the Constitution, but rather the National Internal Revenue Code. So ang exemption sa income tax of the religious and charitable organizations, dili si Article 6. Kay si Article 6, real property tax ralagi ang ihang exempt. Ang exemption sa income tax is on the naasa NIRC. Exception, so as a general rule, they are exempt from tax, income tax. Exception, if the income of whatever kind of nature from any of their properties or from any of their activities for profit, regardless of the disposition made of such income, shall be subject to tax. So kung naakuno sila ay mga business or any activities that are for profit, ang income ato is taxable. Okay. So for example, for religious institutions, charitable na lang. For charitable institutions, most of their income are from donations, diba? So ang kaning income nila from donations, they are exempt from tax. However, if they have income based on kanang namaligya sila mga merchandise or sa mga gipangbaligya nila, kanang nga income is not anymore exempt from tax. Then donors and estate taxation. They are not taxable as long as not more than 30% of such shall be used for administration purposes. For example, I am a very rich person, and then daghan kong mga excess properties. Ngayon ko nga, wala naman din ako gigamit ako ang 10 hectare na land. Ako na lang ning i-donate sa simbahan. So if ako siyang i-donate, I will not be liable for donors tax if ako siyang i-donate sa religious or charitable organizations. Or pwede po estate, in my will, for example, I died, and in my will, I specifically named the Roman Catholic Church as the recipient of my 10 hectare land, so it will be exempt from estate tax. Prohibition against administration purpose. Okay. Kanin, not taxable as long as not more than 30% of such shall be used for administration purposes. Kanang mga office expenses, salary sa inyong mga employees sa charitable organizations, dapat not more than 30% ang magamit sa donation. Dapat at least 70% ana is magamit jud nimo for religious purposes or for charitable purposes. Let's say if only 50% ang gigamit for charitable purposes and the other 50 for administrative, kay panghatag ni mo bonus sa inyong mga officers, ipang meals, transportation allowance, and so on. So it will become taxable na. Okay. The gift is an allowable deduction of the donor. So for example here, di ba? Since even though exempt si donor from the payment of donor's tax if mo donate siya dito ni religious ni charitable, even if exempt siya sa donor's tax, ang amount sa iyang gift pwede niya gamiton as allowable deduction, di ba? Sa inyong income tax, sa computation sa income tax nimo as a donor, nga makalitoy gross income minus allowable deductions, correct? Katong exempt taloba debt charipin. So si cha is charitable, di ba? Charitable. So kung hatag ka gift, it is part of your allowable deductions. Therefore, yung imuhang taxable income will reduce. Therefore, imo tax liability will also reduce. Although wala kay donor's tax nga gibayran, but in the computation of your own personal income tax, the amount of gift that you have given to those religious and charitable organizations may be used as an allowable deduction as part of your cha sa imong exempt taloba de cha repent the cha. There you can claim it as your allowable deduction. Okay. And then prohibition against taxation of non-stock, non-profit educational institutions. So kabantay mo diri akong gibutang is charitable and religious raha sa kaninga income tax o donor's tax nga rules. But kani silang tulo, so tuloha religious, charitable, educational. Sila yung tulo exempt from real property tax. Okay? But ang rule nila sa income tax, lahi silang tulo, dili nimo pwede isagol silang tulo. Ang parehas lang is si religious o si charitable. Lahi o rule si educational institution when it comes to income tax. But when it comes to real property tax, parehas lang tulo. Real property tax, religious, charitable, educational, the same. Exempt sila sa real property tax as long as actually, directly, and exclusively used for their specific purpose. Then for si religious and charitable, same sila. Same sila o rule sa income tax. They are exempt from tax, no? Exempt if katong mga activities for profit. So kabantay mo, wala sila threshold diri sa income tax. Wala na ingon nga, wala nilapas og 50% or wala nilapas og 30, blah blah blah. Wala inaana nga threshold. Ang income sa religious o charitable exempt from tax. Except if kaning nga income is for profit, katong mga activities for profit nila. But kung kaning nga income is gikan jud sa ilahang pag-conduct of, for example, if religious, pag-conduct og misa, mga special mass intentions, kana, di ba profit man sila, naka-income man si church, pero exempt na siya from tax. Pero kung ang income na earn sa church is because of their activities for profit, then that becomes taxable. Same goes with charitable. Now, let's look at educational institutions. Lahi ilaha. Okay, so not the educational institutions. Take note, this is non-stock, non-profit. So for educational institutions, we have to distinguish whether it is stock or non-stock. Kung may kag-stock, di ba sa corporation law ninyo, si pasabot ng stock. Kung stock corporation, that means for profit. Private siya, no private. Private man sa USC. Okay, for profit siya. But kung may kag non-stock, non-profit, like ni USC, no? That means no amount of its income will inure to the benefit of a specific individual. Kunohay. Okay? So, kung non-stock, non-profit, money ang rule. Exempt regardless of the source of income, as long as the income was used actually, directly, and exclusively for educational purposes. So, an example of a non-stock non-profit educational institution is USC, USJR, diba? They are non-stock non-profit. So, si USCDI is exempt from income tax, regardless of the source, as long as the income was used actually, directly, and exclusively for education purposes. Okay, so let's distinguish ha. Kaning si non-stock charitable religious, di ba? Ang sa income tax nila, matter ang source. Sakto? Matter ang source. If ang source sa ilang income, kay gikan jud sa ilahang tinuod nga purpose ba, religious purpose, charitable purpose, that is exempt from tax. But if the source of their income is for activities for profit, then kato nga income nga nakuha nila from activities from for profit, this becomes liable for income tax. Okay? So kaning sa non-stock charitable and religious, for income tax purposes, the source is important. But for non-stock educational institution, the source is not important. So bisan if for example sa USC, no, naman siya canteen. So ang canteen is not educational purpose, di ba? Naka-earn siya income from canteen. Naka-earn siya income from the dormitories. Naka-earn siya income from the tuition fees and all others. Regardless of the source of the income is exempt as long as it was actually directly and exclusively used for educational purposes. So kung ang income sa canteen gigamit ni USC para for educational purposes para palit ba ron ang mga bagong nga aircons or bagong nga chairs, that's for educational purposes, so that is exempt regardless of the source. So mo na ang kailangan i-distinguish jud nimo si charitable or religious o si educational institutions when it comes to income tax. So exempt regardless of the source. However, the exemption does not extend to purchases and importations of goods or properties and purchases of services. So for example, if mag-import si USC o kanang, let's say, particular equipment, moagi man na sa customs, si customs kay mo impose man na siya tariff rates, mag-impose siya VAT or importation, so dili exempt si USC ana. Okay? And purchases of services. So for example, si USC magpa-cleaning sa yung aircon, so nag-hire siya og kanang business, another business nga mo do sa cleaning. So ang katong other business, if naay VAT ang iyang services, then si USC should also pay for VAT. But for income tax, wala siya income tax bayaran, halag pila pa na kadako ilang income, no? Wala say VAT. Bantay mo sa inyong tuition fees, sa assessment ninyo, wala may VAT, VAT 12%. Wala, because USC is exempt from income tax and VAT. Yes. You have a question? So this exemption only applies to non-stock, non-profit educational institutions. So mo to kung giingon ha, you need to distinguish whether the educational institution is stock or non-stock. Okay, kung non-stock mo ni atong rule, exempt regardless of the source, as long as actually directly and exclusively used for educational purposes. Kung stock siya, that means for profit siya. Miss, ang mga services sa is it purchase of services? No, it is not purchase of services. Ang pasabot sa purchase of services kay another business nga imong gipatrabaho diri. Kami manggod, services sa professor, we are not independent contractors. We are listed as employees. Kung independent contractor paunta mi, let's say, kung may kag independent contractor, more siya freelancer ba? Kung freelancer lang mi nga, na-render mi og service diri sa USC o niya, tagaan na mag-resibo si USC, tagaan na mag-bill si USC nga, oy, mao ni akong number of hours, bayari ko ninyo, mao ni akong rate, pwede ma-consider siya as purchase of services. But since di man me freelance, di man me independent contractors, we are considered as employees. So this is not part of purchase of services. Wala may VAT po. Kaya employee, di man ka mag-impose of VAT. Okay, how about, we might ask, how about stock educational institutions? Example of a stock educational is UC, diba? So, ngano ganining stock or nganong kaingon kag stock or non-stock? Kung may kag stock, that means that the income inures to the benefit of a specific individual. But may kag non-stock, the income will not inure to the benefit of a specific individual. Like in USC daw, the income inures to the benefit of the entire SVD community, while a specific individual, correct? So it is non-stock, non-profit. Kung stock educational institutions, are they also exempt? Are they also exempt? Answer, no. They are not exempt. Okay? They are subjected to a special rate of 10%. 10% tax or 30% as the case may be. I say as the case may be because they have a threshold to comply. So if actually wala na siya diri sa constitution, ha? Ang katong stock mong wala siya diri sa ako ang handout kay dili man siya constitutional limitation. We are still discussing constitutional limitations. Ang kaning stock educational dito na nasa inyong NIRC jud mismo. Nasa section 27 man siguro, section 27, somewhere there. Section 27 onwards. Naadira ang rule ni stock educational institution. But para na lang may idea, para ma-comprehensive ang inyong idea aning educational institutions. Ang stock educational institutions subject to income tax at 10% or 30%. Depende sa unsa man sa threshold. Ang threshold niya is dapat not more than 50% of the total income came from unrelated activities. So for example, si UC, di ba, naaman siya canteen, okay? Let's say ang iyahang income sa canteen more than 50% of the total income of the school. So if that happens, nalapas siya sa threshold, ang iyahang income tax is already at 30%. 30. No, I think because of create, it becomes 25 na, 25% ang corporation tax. But again, the point is, dili na siya maka-avail sa special tax nga 10%. Maka-avail na siya sa tax nga 10% if ang iyang income from unrelated activities dili mulapas og 50% sa iyang total income. Okay? So mura sa siya o based sa source. Mura siya mahog nga same ani. Based sa source. But different ra gihapon. Kaya diri sa charitable o religious, based lagi siya sa source, no? Kung ang source niya charitable o religious, example, automatic exempt. Kung ang source niya activities for profit, automatically taxed. Walay threshold, bahalag pila pa na ay tax gyud na siya. But for stock educational institutions, tanaw ni mo ang source. No? Step 1, tanawa ang source. Kung ang source niya, ang source is related activities, meaning educational jud siyang activities. Second source is unrelated activities. So, compare nimo sila if ang total nimo, kung ang unrelated lapas o 50% sa total, di siya maka-avail sa 10%. But if wa siya nilapas, maka-avail siya sa 10%. Sa tanan, related o unrelated. Okay? So, pareha sila og tax tanan. Whether related or unrelated, as long as wala sila nilapas sa threshold, 10%. But kung nilapas sila sa threshold, ang related o unrelated, taxed as ordinary corporate income tax, which is, I think, 25% na because of create law. But for non-stock, non-profit educational institutions, you will not look at the source, but rather you will look at the use. No, this is what makes this one special. Because, di ba, so far, atong tanaw diri murag importante man ang source. But diri for non-stock non-profit educational institutions, the source is irrelevant as long as the use was for educational purposes, actually directly and exclusively for educational purposes. How about donors and estate taxation? Same na ni, dili na ta maglibog. Same na siya sa charitable religious. Ang donors and estate tax are exempt. Sorry. Donors tax rather is exempt, but estate tax is not exempt. Here, sorry ha, ako ibalik-balik. Charitable and religious, both donors and estate tax are exempt, but for educational institutions, donors only. Estate tax is not exempt. Now, note that alumni association is not covered, thus taxable. So if you have an alumni association, all income generated by the alumni association is taxable. The alumni association cannot claim exemption of income tax based on this because yung siya, oy, exempt me, educational. No, because it is not an educational institution per se, alumni association. So if you have an alumni association, you have to pay tax as an ordinary taxable person. No exemption. Okay, and then for these constitutional limitations, I don't think important kayo siya for CPAs, maybe for lawyers. Kato lang. So, ang importante lang for CPAs are prohibition against taxation of religious, charitable, and educational institutions. Again, i-combine mo silang tulo, religious, charitable, educational. Same sila o rule for real property taxes. So real property taxes exempt sila as long as actually, directly, and exclusively used for their own purpose. Ang income tax is lahi. So dapat magkuyog si religious o si charitable. So for them, the source is important. Ang source kay based sa ilang original nga purpose, exempt from tax. For other sources, taxable regardless of the amount. Kay wala threshold. For educational institutions, you have to split into two: educational non-stock o stock. Kung non-stock, income is exempt regardless of the source as long as the income was used actually, directly, and exclusively for educational purposes. For stock educational institutions, you have to look at the related and unrelated. So kung inig-total nimo ang 50%, ang total sa unrelated exceeds 50% of the entire income of the school, then it will be subjected as an ordinary corporation, so corporate income tax. But if the income from unrelated activities does not exceed 50% of the total income of the school, then they can avail of the special tax rate of 10%. So this is what we call your predominance test. Ang predominance test mo itong 50% threshold. Predominance test. Okay, so I hope that's clear. I think you can read this actually on your own, but for purposes of exam, I think maura to ang pinaka-importante nga part. But this is also important to know. Next is the stages or aspects of taxation. So first, we have to levy or impose tax, and then we have to assess and collect tax, and then the taxpayer should pay the tax. So levy, assessment, and payment. Levy is the imposition. So this is the enactment of a tax law saying that, there is a specific tax for this particular subject or object. This usually includes the selection of cones, the coverage, object, nature, extent, and situs. After the passage of a tax law, we will now assess and collect. So this is the role of BIR. So tax administration, pasabot, pagkolekta sa tax. And then the compliance by the taxpayer, so the payment, magbayad na siya. So that ends the process, and then we go back again to the first step. The first two are referred as the impact of taxation. First two, levy and assessment, impact of taxation, while the third one is referred to as the incidence of taxation. So what are the requisites of a valid tax? It should be for a public purpose. It should be uniform. The person or property being taxed should be within the jurisdiction of the taxing authority because, again, tax is territorial in nature. The tax must not impinge or on the inherent and constitutional limitations on the power of taxation. So we already know what these limitations are. So if a particular tax law is in violation of an inherent or a constitutional limitation, then that tax law is void. Okay, so then let's look at some examples or kinds of taxes. Personal, poll, or capitation. This is as to object, as to what is being taxed. If what is taxed is a person, no, you as a person, we call it personal, poll, or capitation tax. This is imposed on persons without regard to their property or occupation. By the mere fact that you are a person, you are being taxed. Wakay income, wakay property, pero person man ka, you still have tax. That is what we call personal, poll, or capitation tax. An example of which is your community tax or your cedula. Okay, we have a basic community tax of 5 pesos. If wala ka income, wala ka property, 5 pesos lang ang dato ang community tax. And that community tax is an example of a personal, poll, or capitation tax. So as to object, maniha as to object. Kung ang gitaxan is ang person itself, mo na siya, personal tax. Kung ang gitaxan is the property, we call it property tax. An example is your real property tax. Next, if what is being taxed is the privilege or performance of an act, the enjoyment of a privilege, or the engaging of an occupation, this is a privilege or an excise tax. Now, don't be misled by the word excise tax as being used in our National Internal Revenue Code. Ang excise tax nga naa sa atong NIRC, those are, this is the tax imposed on particular articles, no, katong mga beverages, katong mga cigarettes and all. Lahat to siya nga excise tax. Ang katong nga excise tax, dili to siya kind of tax, but an example of a tax. But as to kind of tax, when we say excise tax or privilege tax, you are looking at what is being taxed. If what is taxed is the performance of an act, the enjoyment of a privilege, for example, you want to exercise your profession, enjoyment of a privilege, no? Or the privilege of gifting someone. So, naka-privilege to give a gift. That is an example of a privilege tax. That is a privilege tax. And the tax specifically for that is the owner's tax. And for example, the privilege to pass on a property from one generation to the next. If I die, I could pass my property to my heirs. That is a privilege. And that is being taxed for estate tax. The privilege to conduct business. You are being imposed an income tax. The privilege to practice my profession as a lawyer, as an accountant, I have to pay professional tax of, I think, 350 every year. Okay, so that is an example of a privilege tax. As to burden or incidence, tax could be a direct tax or an indirect tax. A direct tax is demanded from the person who, as intended, should pay the tax. You cannot shift this from the payment of the tax could not be shifted. Ay, di ba kung sa ining incidence, akong balik ko na rin ha, sa stages or aspects, ang incidence refers to the payment. So, for direct tax, you cannot pass on the burden of paying. Kung kinsa ang liable, siya jud ang mobayad. So kung income tax, kung ikaw jud ang naka-earn sa income, ikaw jud dapat ang mobayad sa income tax. If ikaw ang ni-donate, ikaw jud ang mobayad sa donor's tax. If ikaw ang namatay, o niya, imuhang properties ang i-pass on to the heirs, your estate should be the one paying that estate tax. Dili nimo pwede ipasa sa heirs. No, oy, heirs, kamo man jud nakadawat sa property, kamo nila bayad sa estate tax, di na pwede. Because estate tax is a direct tax. You cannot transfer the burden from one person to another. Indirect tax, on the other hand, you can shift the burden to someone else. Not as a tax, but as part of the purchase price. So for example, VAT. When I buy something, I pay VAT, right? And when I sell it, I could also impose VAT. So murag mahog nga napasa na ako sa lain. Pagpalit na ako ang purchase price, pagpalit na ako na ay VAT, pagbaligya na ako, naaman po yung VAT, akong gipasa sa lain nga person. So VAT is an indirect tax. I can pass the burden to another person. And then katong person nga nipalit na ako, if later on iya na pong ibaligya to someone else, then pwede po niya ma-imposean of VAT, mabalhin-balihin. Okay? And then other percentage taxes and documentary stamp taxes. These are examples of indirect taxes. Okay. If the end user is tax exempt, his exemption applies only to direct taxes, and the buyer cannot claim tax refund on those taxes that were passed on to him. So for example, di ba kaning indirect tax, you can pass the burden from one person to another. What if ang imuhang gitransferan sa burden is exempt from tax? Example, katong si non-stock non-profit educational institution, di ba? Exempt man siya sa VAT. But let's say ako, vatable person ko, na ako'y VAT, but pwede man ako ma-transfer. So, pag-transfer na ako sa VAT sa iya, nipalit man siya na ako. So, akong gi-transfer ang VAT, ang burden of VAT sa iya, sa kang USC. Let's say sa CUSC being a non-stock non-profit educational institution. Can USC say, oy, excuse me, I am exempt from VAT, so you should not transfer your VAT to me. Can USC say that? What do you think? Sige daw, kamo. What do you think? Can USC say, I should not pay the VAT because you cannot transfer your VAT burden to me. Although I am ako VAT person daw ko, si USC daw, exempt man siya sa VAT. Di daw kung nako siya pwede imposan of VAT. Di daw nako siya pwede bahinan or balhinan sa ako ang VAT. Can USC say that? There's actually a case for that filed by I think it was USJR filed a case regarding this VAT. Kaya gi-imposan ko na sila VAT sa ilang mga suppliers. Do you think? Okay, since answer is no, they cannot say that because their exemption applies only to direct taxes. Okay, correct. So no, they cannot. Although, yes, they are exempted from VAT, it means that CUSC, kung maka-earn siya og income, pwede walay VAT. For example, ini-collect niya tuition from the students, walay VAT. No, wala mo makitaan dira nga 12% VAT because the exemption is only for that purpose. But if gipass on from the supplier padong didto ni USC, then USC has to shoulder the burden of VAT that was passed to it by its own suppliers. Okay, ako, can I claim exemption? Okay, VAT person lagi ko, pero ang ako mong gibaligyaan is VAT exempt. Si USC, VAT exempt man siya. Can I claim VAT exemption? Answer kay no pod, because that is personal to USC. I am not a non-stock non-profit educational institution, although my buyer is a non-stock non-profit educational, so I cannot claim exemption, correct? So what is my remedy now as the seller? Remedy of the seller if the buyer is enjoying exemptions from both direct and indirect taxes, I can avail of the remedy of tax refund from the government. pwede ra ko mga og tax credit certificate. Okay, another classification of tax as to rates this time: specific tax, ad valorem tax, or mixed. Specific tax is based on some standard of weight or physical measurement. Example, excise tax on cigarettes, and liquors. So specific is not a specific tax for a specific weight. So for example, this weight this volume of liquors, lahi ang ilang excise tax kay nani. If mas taas ilahang kuan, ilahang volume or lahi ilang quality of liquors, lahi po din ilahang tax. Tax credit certificate will serve as an instrument regarding the transfer. No, ang tax credit certificate, so for example, no, mag-claim ka og let's say, mag-claim ka og tax refund. Usually magud ang BIR dili man sila mo issue og refund nga kwarta nga refundan jud ka og kwarta. Rare circumstance lang jud na siya. So para magamit nimo ang imuhang og sobra nga tax nga nabayad, you can ask BIR to issue you a tax credit certificate. Ang tax credit certificate, pauna nimo sa BIR. Unya, mag-indicate dira kung pila ang amount sa credit nimo, and then you can use it to offset to as payment for your other taxes. So for example, you have a tax credit of 500,000, and then later on you will be incurring an income tax of 1 million. So you can use your tax credit certificate to reduce your tax liability. Ang set off kay debt versus tax. Now, debt versus tax, and set off is ang set off kay automatic provided by law. Walay any agreements and all, di ba? So remember mo ganina ni discuss ko nga a tax could also be converted as a debt when there's already a judgment, when there is a compromise agreement between the government and the taxpayer. So in that case, pwede rin mo siya ma-set off. But we will not use the term set off because set off is basically nakoy utang nimo, nakay utang nako. It's not. This is actually set off is actually automatic by provision of law. But when we say tax credit, you can only use tax credit. More hapon siya set off. Ang effect, more siya set off. But ang difference lang for tax credit, you are given a certificate by the BIR evidencing that you can use this amount as deduction from your tax liability. So mahog og na ay consent ni BIR. Oy, i-minus na lang na. But ang set off manggod, there is no consent by the BIR. Ang set off manggod is by operation of law, by mere saying you owe me something and I owe you something, then quits na ta. Yes, the tax credit certificate could be used as a deduction for your other taxes, not necessarily VAT. Pwede siya magamit with any taxes. Pwede siya. But ang catch kay ang certificate na siya expiration. So kung ma-expire na, you cannot use it anymore. And it is also not transferable. So, but yes, you can use it as a deduction for your other taxes, not necessarily VAT. Okay. So an example is, for example, you are into exports, no? So, nag-export ka, zero rated man mo na, zero rated VAT. So, wala kay VAT output, correct? But ang imuhang supplier, local suppliers VAT, pagpalit nimo nagkabayad kag VAT. Kay vatable persons man imong suppliers. So, na kay input VAT. Na kay input VAT, wala kay output VAT kay pagbaligya nimo ana sa imong customers, export man, zero rated. So zero rated output, VAT output, but you paid VAT input because your suppliers are vatable persons. So nakabayad na kag input VAT, wala kay output VAT. Nya ang pag-determine mo na sa VAT liability is output minus input. So output minus input is equal to VAT payable. If 0 imo output, pero na kay input, let's say 1 million, so nag-negative 1 million na ka. But you cannot use the input VAT that you have paid forever. Kay, kuan man ka, di mo siya pwede i-carry over. Kay export lagi ka. Eventually, next year, 0 ragyapon na yung mohang VAT output. So, mag-accumulate ang imong input VAT without being used as a deduction sa imong output. Kaya wala lagi kay output VAT. So, in that case, you can ask the BAR to issue you a tax credit certificate so that you can use the tax credit certificate as deduction baron sa imong real property no, not real property tax. XX. Kaya nga no, ang real property tax is local tax. So, kanang mga national taxes like income tax, like your other percentage taxes, your DST, and so on, mga national taxes. Mga national taxes. But you cannot use it, you cannot use your tax credit certificate against local taxes. Kaya lahi man og collecting authority good. Ang mo-collect ana sa local tax is your treasurer, municipal or city treasurer. Ang mo-collect sa national tax is si BIR. So kung nakay tax credit certificate from BIR, you can offset it. You can use it, nila lang mo word, mo use a word nga offset. You can use it as a deduction sa inyong tax liability for other national taxes. Okay. And then ad valorem, this is based on the value of the subject property. Example, real estate tax, donor's tax, estate tax. A choice between specific and or ad valorem depending on the conditions attached. Then as to purpose, you already know this. It could be fiscal or revenue or regulatory, special or sumptuary. As to scope or authority to impose, national tax, this is levied by the national government. Local or municipal tax is levied by the LGUs. So, saan pagkahibaw di ay exam? If ang tax is a national tax or a municipal tax. If you can see it in your NIRC, then that is a national tax. So, if you look at NIRC, unsur may na ang tax dito. Income tax, sunod donors, sunod estate, VAT, percentage tax, excise tax, documentary stamp tax. Ana sila mo or na ang national tax. But ang trick lang there is ang sa income tax daghan kay siya mga panganpod, compensation, final tax, passive income tax, at ako mga mention kanina, capital gains tax, national tax na sila. Kung dili nimo siya makitaan sa NIRC, that means that tax is a local tax. Let's say, real estate tax or community tax. Kani siya, makita ninyo sa Local Government Code of 1991. Na dito, i-enumerate kung unsa nga taxes ang makollect sa ato ang local governments. Your local government taxation will be discussed by Attorney Rizal. So, makibaw mo unsa nga mga taxes ang i-collect sa ato ang LGUs. Then, classification as to graduation of rates. So, progressive tax, we already understand, diba, what we mean by progressive tax. It means that the tax rate increases as your tax base increases. Example is income tax, particularly income tax on compensation. Dili tanan income tax, ha? Kay ang income tax, broad ra ba siya kaayo? So, naa siya tax on dividends and also ang progressive tax lang sa income tax is only tax on compensation. Katong makita ninyo nga naamoy table nga brackets and then each bracket na siya particular tax rate. Regressive tax is when the tax rate decreases as the tax base increases. Wala tayo regressive tax there is sa Philippines. Not applicable. Proportion, okay, unfair po no nga. Tax rate decreases as tax base increases. Magkadakoy mo income, magagamay na nun yung tax. That's unfair. No? Then, proportionate tax. Proportionate tax is a fixed percentage. And then you multiply it with a tax base. For example, VAT and other percentage taxes. Okay. So we're almost done. General concepts in taxation, prospectivity of tax laws. Tax laws should be applied prospectively. Okay. They must not be given retroactive effect. So, for example, if there is a new tax law now, it will be applicable today and in the future. Dili mo pwede i-go back sa mobalik as time. No, for example, let's say, di ba, I mentioned that originally our VAT is at 10% and then it was eventually increased to 12. Then can BIR saying, oh, 12 naman ang VAT. Sa katong mga gipang collect sa una nga VAT, palihog ko hatag sa inyong kuwang kay 10% rato inyong nabayad sa una. That is not allowed. Okay? Tax law should be applied prospectively. Then imprescriptibility. General rule, taxes are imprescriptible because it is the lifeblood of the government. So as a rule, there is no time limit daw for the collection of taxes. Exception is when the tax law itself provides for statute of limitations or prescriptive periods, which in this case, in the Philippines case, na-adjudicate prescriptive periods. But as a rule, kung wala jud unta gi-specify sa tax laws daw nga naay type prescriptive periods, then taxes are imprescriptible. They cannot be they can be collected anytime. So for example, your ancestors owe it mga year 1900s, kunya karon 2022 na, if imprescriptible ang tax, pwede ra gyapon siya makolekt karon. But luckily, our tax laws provide for statute of limitations. So there is a specific number of years within which the BIR should collect the tax. Otherwise, wala na sila right to collect it, even though wala jud punta ka ni bayad. But again, as a general rule, taxes are imprescriptible. Then situs of taxation, it is the place or authority that has the right to impose and collect taxes. So these are the factors that determine the situs of taxation. So ang pasabot sa situs of taxation, kinsa ang pwede collect sa tax asa ka mobayad sa tax. Okay, this depends upon the residence of the taxpayer, citizenship of the taxpayer, nature of the tax, subject matter of the tax, or source of income. So let's go over this very briefly. So for community tax, this is the situs is the residence of the taxpayer. So in my case, I live in Tacloban, so I have to pay my community tax to the city of Tacloban. Real property, location of the property. So if I have a property in Cebu, I should pay my real property tax in Cebu because that is where my property is located. Mana pasabot sa situs. Tangible personal property, location of the property gihapon. So as what I have mentioned a while ago, personal property may be separated from its owner. So dili magdepende sa domicile sa owner. But for intangible personal property, the rule is the situs of taxation is the domicile of the owner. So ang pasabotan ni mobilya, sa contour, personal, that means that the intangible personal property follows the owner. Kung asa si owner mo adtong sunod daw ang intangible personal property. Unsa example sa intangible personal property? For example, I am an inventor, I hold a patent, di ba? Patent, trademark, copyright, kato inyong mga intangible properties ba sa inyong financial accounting. So di ba, these are properties man, but these properties are intangible. So it follows the domicile of the owner. So if I have a patent and I live in Tacloban, my patent shall be taxed here in Tacloban. Exceptions when the property has acquired a business status in another jurisdiction or if there is an express provision of law that provides otherwise. Okay. So we need not dwell on this because this is for those students. Income tax depends upon the place. If you are a non-resident, especially if you are a non-resident alien, non-resident foreign corporation, and non-resident citizens. So if you are a non-resident alien, your income will be taxed. The income tax will be imposed only on income generated or earned within the Philippines. So mga income within. Wala ilabot ang income without the Philippines. And based on nationality, if you are a resident citizen or a domestic corporation, because if you are a resident citizen or a domestic corporation, you are taxed on income within and without, correct? And then residents, if you are a resident alien and a resident foreign corporation, yes, you are taxed on income on, tax on income generated within the Philippines only, where you reside. Donor's tax and estate tax, the situs is placed if you are a non-resident alien. So the place where the gift was situated, or the property subject of the estate is located. And then nationality, if you are a resident citizen or a non-resident citizen, you are being taxed on properties within and without for purposes of estate tax, and also for donor's tax. For resident alien, only for your residence. So if you are here in the if you are living in the Philippines, you are a resident alien, you are only taxed for gifts made within the Philippines. If made outside, wala na. VAT, situs of VAT is the place where the transaction is made. So it must be within the Philippines. Excise tax, place where the privilege is exercised. So in my case, I pay privilege of exercising my profession in Tacloban. So I pay my professional tax in Tacloban. Franchise tax, place where the franchise is exercised regardless of where the services or products are delivered. Okay, so if you have a franchise, and you are using that franchise in your place, then you have to pay franchise tax in your place. Franchise tax is actually a local tax. Okay, you cannot see franchise tax in the NIRC. So you have to pay this to your local government. And then electronic transactions, we have to refer to Section 23 of the E-Commerce Act. An electronic document is deemed to be dispatched at the place where the originator has its place of business and received at the place where the addressee has its place of business. So the tax situs will be at the place of origin. So if we have electronic transactions, especially for example, Shopee, palit mo sa Shopee. Ang inyong gipalitan is nasa Manila and you are in Cebu. So the tax will be paid dito sa Manila. So si seller nimo will have to pay tax there in Manila and not in Cebu. Okay, because the tax situs for electronic transactions will be the place of origin. Income from sale of shares of stock. If issued by a domestic corporation, if ang stock kuno is issued by a domestic corporation, meaning a corporation that is incorporated using the laws of the Philippines, then the situs is the principal office of the domestic corporation. So for example, BPI is a domestic corporation. Let's say ang ilang principal office is in Makati, but then naam sila mga branches sa lain-lain nga lugar. So if they sell shares of stock, the situs is in Makati because Makati is their principal office. If it is a sale of foreign shares of stock, you have to look at the sources of income of such foreign corporation. If there is 50% or more of the gross income of the foreign corporation for the preceding years that were derived from sources within the Philippines, it shall be considered from the Philippines. If less than 50%, considered outside Philippines, so therefore not taxable. For interest income, residence of the debtor. For service income, place where the services was performed. So if I have let's say construction business here in Tacloban, and then I have a construction project in Ormoc. So since the service was performed in Ormoc, the service income shall be taxed in Ormoc. Okay, and then double taxation. The question is double taxation prohibited? Answer is, it depends. Is it a direct double taxation or indirect double taxation? So double taxation per se is not prohibited. What is prohibited is direct double taxation in a strict sense. So when can we say that there is direct double taxation? So remember these. All must concur. The tax, okay. When we say double taxation, duha ka book tax gi-impose nimo sa imuha. So mo reklamo ka, wala anong duha man ka book tax? Is this valid or not? It depends. If it meets all the elements of direct double taxation, then it is void. It is not allowed. It is illegal. So all must concur that must have the same subject matter, same purpose, same taxing authority, same jurisdiction, same taxing period, and same kind or character. So, example, okay. Example, income tax. When you earn income from your business, diba, you have to pay income tax, and income tax is a national tax. Kaya naam siya sa NIRC, so national tax siya. Ang iyahang taxing authority is BIR, correct? And then, at the same time, kolektahan pa jud ka og business tax sa LGU. Okay, based gihapon sa imong net income. So sa net income nimo na kay bayron nun nga income tax. At the same time, yun sila nga mubayad sa daw kuno ka og business tax based sa imong net income. Okay, let's check whether there is direct double taxation. First, is the subject matter the same? Is the subject matter of the income tax and the business tax the same? Yes or no? The answer is yes, they are the same. Ang subject matter is the same. It's the same net income. Is the purpose the same? Yes, the purpose is the same. To tax the net income of the business owner. Is the taxing authority the same? Answer is no. The taxing authority of income tax is BIR, being a national tax, while the taxing authority of the business tax is the municipal treasurer or city treasurer, because the business tax is a local tax. Jurisdiction is not also the same, because the jurisdiction of income tax is the national government, and the jurisdiction of the business tax is local. Taxing period, is the taxing period the same? Okay, yes. Is it the same kind or character? Let's say yes. But although daghan tag yeses, but naaman tayo no sa taxing authority, ug naa tayo no sa jurisdiction, then we cannot say that there is direct double taxation. Since there is no direct double taxation, that is allowed. Allowed na kolektahan ka og duha ka tax. So that becomes indirect double taxation, which is permitted. This is permitted when some of the elements of direct double taxation are absent. So if nadri usa diri nga wala na checkan, it will become indirect double taxation. Okay? If it is an indirect double taxation, it is permitted. Okay. Tax treaties as relief from double taxation. So for example, same unta sila tanan ani exempt jurisdiction. For example, ang jurisdiction is Philippines, and then the other one is another country. So gitaksan ka sa Philippines, gitaksan pa jud ka sa lain nga country. So as a relief from that double taxation, you may tax treaties, mo nang mo enter tax treaties ang mga countries to provide for tax credits, tax deductions, tax exemptions, or imposition of a rate lower than the normal domestic rate. You may ignore this because this is not relevant for CPA or BSA students. And then how can we escape from taxation? We can escape from taxation by shifting our tax burden. Okay, so there could be forward shifting, backward shifting, onward shifting. You can read this on your own, but in essence, shifting of tax burden is transferring your burden no, from you to another person. And this is only applicable to, unsa ito nga taxes? Only for indirect taxes, because direct taxes no, cannot be, the burden of direct taxes cannot be shifted to another person, as discussed a while ago. And then we have this so-called tax avoidance and tax evasion. So which one of these is allowed? So tax avoidance, or also called tax minimization, this is allowed. Okay, this is a legally permissible alternative method of assessing taxable property or income in order to avoid or reduce tax liability. So if you want to minimize your tax, you need to master the tax laws para makaiba mo, pwede day kanina lang ako gamitan instead of this one para makagamay kong tax. Marag strategy. Dapat makaibaw ka sa best strategy to reduce your tax legally. But tax evasion, on the other hand, or also known as tax dodging, is illegal. This is when you use illegal or fraudulent means to defeat or lessen payment of a tax. For example, you know that your income is 1 million, but then you intentionally misstated your income from 1 million, imong gihimo nga 500,000. And then instead nga ang imong allowable deductions 300,000 ra, imong padakan imong expenses para mahimong 400,000. Para mas mugamay pag yun ang imong tax. That one is tax evasion, which is illegal. Okay, elements of tax evasion: payment of an amount of tax less than what is known by the taxpayer to be legally due. An accompanying state of mind which is evil, in bad faith, deliberate, willful, or intentional, and not merely incidental. And a cause of action or failure of action which is unlawful. So, dapat ang tax evasion daw is intentional. You intentionally misstated your tax. But if it is only incidental nga murag na overlook lang nimo, that is not considered as tax evasion. That is not considered in bad faith. So you only have to pay for the deficiency tax if you are assessed. So what could be used as proof that you are using tax evasion as a means to reduce your income, your tax liability? Let's say failure to declare your true and actual income derived from business for 2 consecutive years. So, siya og presumption. So, kung for 2 years, Jude, gisayop jud nimo og declare ang imuhang true and actual income, whether intentional or not, that could be used as a proof nga you really intended to evade tax. Substantial underdeclaration of income in the ITR for 4 consecutive years coupled by intentional overstatement of deductions. So, gi-understate ang income, gi-overstate ang deductions or expenses. Those may be used as proof against you in a case for tax evasion where you can be imprisoned. Okay, exemption from taxation. This is the grant of immunity expressed or implied to particular persons or corporations from a tax which persons or corporations generally within the same taxing districts are obliged to pay. So some entities are exempt from tax. The exemption is not presumed, so dapat dila ka mag-assume na nga ay exempt siguro ko. There must be a positive law granting you exemption. So examples of tax exemptions under the tax code: public cemeteries, civic organization, not-for-profit. Example, mga Integrated Bar of the Philippines, Rotary and Lions Clubs, non-stock corporations, business league, not-for-profit, non-stock non-profit educational institutions, general professional partnerships, mutual savings bank, not having capital stock, and that the train law provides that a compensation income of individual taxpayers of 250,000 and below shall be exempt from income tax, as you can see from your tax table. There are also tax exemptions provided under special laws. such as your SSS retirement benefits. So if ma-retire na tayo, makadawat ta og pension from SSS, then exempt na siya from tax. GSIS as well. Veterans benefits, senior citizens nga exemption, no, katong there are several exemptions particular to senior citizens. Then PCSO winnings of 10,000 and below, Lotto winnings of 10,000 and below, enterprises under the Investment Incentives Act of the Board of Investment, exemptions of PWDs. Okay, next, equitable recoupment. It is a principle which allows a taxpayer whose claim for refund has been barred due to prescription to recover said tax by setting off the prescribed refund against a tax that may be due and collectible from him. But this is not allowed in the Philippines. The concept of equitable recoupment daw is katong i-offset lagi nimo if nakay tax refundable o niya nakay tax liability, imo daw i-offset. That is not allowed in the Philippines. But as an exception, katong gingon, if the tax is already converted into a debt or na katong mga certificates or judgments from the court, then you can use them as a deduction from your tax liability. So, kani balik na po niya, prohibition on compensation and set-off. No set-off is admissible against the demand for taxes levied for general or local government purposes. Why? Because the government and the taxpayers are not creditors and debtors of each other. That's why we were able to distinguish tax versus debt. Exception when both the claims of the government and the taxpayer against each other have already become due, demandable, and fully liquidated. Kani siya is kung nanay mga judgment from the courts or naay mga compromise agreements entered into between the taxpayer and the BAR or naay mga tax credit certificates. So as long as naanatay judgments, naanatay mga agreements nga gisignan with the BAR, then we can offset. Compromise. Ang compromise is kanang muhangyo ka, pwede pagamyan na lang because gamay man gud ako ang income run or nagsuffer man ko from losses, so you can ask for a compromise. So these are the persons allowed to enter into compromise: BAR commissioner, collector of customs, and customs commissioner. Tax amnesty, this is very prevalent po karon. This is a general pardon or intentional overlooking by the state of its authority to impose penalties. So take note, tax amnesty only applies to penalties. So for example, kanang estate tax, let's say dugay na namatay mong lolo, let's say 1990s pa. Pero wala gibayaran ang estate tax. So nag-accumulate na to, nag-accumulate ang penalties ato surcharges. Then come 2022, nag-issue si BAR of tax amnesty. Ang pasabot ng tax amnesty, ila dong i-forgive tanan penalties and all you have to pay is the basic tax. You can avail of that. Actually, ang tax amnesty is issued by the government to encourage taxpayers to pay. Bayarin na lang ang basic, bahalag wala na ang penalty. That's tax amnesty. So, how do we distinguish it from tax exemption? Tax amnesty is an immunity from all criminal, civil, and administrative obligations arising from non-payment of taxes. Tax exemption applies only to civil liabilities. Then, tax amnesty is a general pardon. Tanan, wala gipili nga taxpayers. But tax exemption only applies to specific persons. Tax amnesty is applied retroactively, di ba? Gipabalik, katong namatay ni mga lolo sa 1990s, o wala na to siya penalty. Retroactive. Tax exemption is prospective. The presence of actual revenue or loss, there is revenue loss here because there were actually taxes due, like katong mga penalties na unta, but collection was waived by the government. But for tax exemption, there is no actual revenue loss because in the first place, gi-exempt Manila. Then lastly, construction and interpretation of tax laws. Tax laws are construed strictly against the government and liberally in favor of the taxpayer. Exception when so for example, if there is doubt whether there is doubt as to the application of a tax law, then it should be construed in favor of the taxpayer. Exception when the law is clear, you need to apply the law. Tax exemption construed strictly against the taxpayer and liberally in favor of the taxing authority. Exception if the grantee is an instrumentality of the government. So if what is exempted is an instrumentality of the government, so this should be construed liberally in favor of the grantee. Then penal provisions of tax laws, this is construed strictly in favor of the government. Taxpayers suit. So if you think that the public funds have been spent by the government in an illegal way, you can institute a suit. You can question the project of the government because ngayon ka nga, oy, the public funds are used and I am a taxpayer. I can sue the government. Okay, so that's taxpayers suit. So that ends our principles of taxation. I think we still have 30 minutes. So I prepared some questions. Gamay lang questions. I think 15 questions only. Okay, so you may type your answers on the chat box. I only have 15 questions here. Okay. Congress passed a sin tax law that increased the tax rates on cigarettes by 1,000%. The law was thought to be sufficient to drive many cigarette companies out of business and was questioned in court by a cigarette company that would go out of business because it would not be able to pay the increased tax. The cigarette company is A, wrong because taxes are the lifeblood of the government. B, wrong because the law recognizes that the power to tax is the power to destroy. C, correct because no government can deprive a person of his livelihood. And D, correct because Congress in this case exceeded its power to tax. Sige daw. Are your answers? Okay. Okay, correct. Letter B. The cigarette company is wrong because the law recognizes that the power to tax is also the power to destroy. And then also, power to tax is unlimited. Actually, the power to tax is CUP. So I don't know kung na-mention ganina, no? CUP, C-U-P-S. Comprehensive, unlimited, plenary, and supreme. CUPs. The power of taxation is CUPs. Comprehensive, unlimited, plenary, and supreme. Okay, next. XYZ Corporation manufactures glass panels and is almost at the point of insolvency. So it's bankrupt. It has no more cash and all it has are unsold glass panels. It received an assessment from the BAR for deficiency income taxes. It wants to pay, but due to lack of cash, it seeks permission to pay in kind with glass panels. Should the BAR grant the requested permission? A, it should grant permission to make payment convenient to taxpayers. B, it should not grant permission because a tax is generally a pecuniary burden. C, it should grant permission, otherwise XYZ Corporation would not be able to pay. D, it should not grant permission because the government does not have the storage facilities for glass panels. Sige, what is your answer? B, B. Okay, the answer is B. It should not grant permission because a tax is generally a pecuniary burden. When we say pecuniary, monetary, di ba? Ito kung gingon kanina, dapat payable in money. Dito siya pwede payment in kind. Next. Money collected from taxation, wala man natin siya na-discuss, no? But this is also, money collected from taxation shall not be paid to any religious dignitary. This is one of the constitutional limitations there that I skipped a while ago. The money collected from tax should not be used as payment for any religious nga persons, but there are exceptions here. So let's see if you can guess. Okay, Correct. Except when the religious dignitary is assigned to the Philippine Army. Other exceptions pa de ani is for example, if a priest is assigned in a leprosarium, pwede na siya bayaran sa government. Pwede bayaran si priest. But other than that, hindi pwede. Which statement below expresses the lifeblood theory? A, thus as taxes must be enforced by the government. B, the underlying basis of taxation is government necessity, for without taxation, a government can neither exist nor endure. Taxation is an arbitrary method of exaction by those who are in the seat of power. The power of taxation is an inherent power of the sovereign to impose burdens upon subjects and objects within its jurisdiction for the purpose of raising revenues. Okay, answer is correct, letter B. Although we could say nga, di ba judicial lifeblood theory, no, necessity theory, manisia, but as I have mentioned a while ago, necessity theory is just a branch of lifeblood theory. Correct. Next, real property taxes should not disregard increases in the value of real property occurring over a long period of time. To do otherwise would violate the canon of a sound tax system referred to as theoretical justice, fiscal adequacy, administrative feasibility, symbiotic relationship. Okay. Kaya di ba magkamahal din na ang real property, di ba? So dapat ang rates daw sa real property tax i-consider jud niya dapat ang increase sa value sa real property over a long period of time. Otherwise, unsa man ihang ma-violate. Dapat dili daw nimo i-disregard ang facts nga magkadugay, magkadako ang value sa property. Answer there is fiscal adequacy. Okay? So, for example, naman tayo specific real property tax rate, no? For this particular property. So if imong i-consider nga eventually in the future mo dako ang value sa real property, ang value itself has a real property, dapat i-adjust sa ni local government iyang real property tax rates, no? Para makakuha pa siya sufficient nga income in the future. Which theory in taxation states that without taxes, a government would be paralyzed for lack of power to activate and operate it, resulting in its destruction? Power to destroy theory, lifeblood theory, sumptuary theory, symbiotic, doctrine. Correct. Lifeblood theory. Choose the correct answer. Double taxation is, kung na ibasa, taas kayo. Okay, the answer ninyo, A. The answer is correct. Is one of the duplicate taxations wherein two taxes must be imposed on the same subject matter, same taxing authority, same jurisdiction, same period, same kind or character of tax, even if the purposes of imposing the same are different. Bank A deposited money with Bank B, which earns interest that is subjected to the 20% final withholding tax. At the same time, Bank A is subjected to the 5% gross receipts tax on its interest income on loan transactions to customers. Which statement below incorrectly describes the transaction? There is double taxation. Is this correct? There is no double taxation, because the first tax is income tax and the second tax is business tax. Some answered C, A. Pakita ang incorrect ha, incorrect. Incorrect, as ang incorrect. It's a choice between C or A. No? Ang inyong answers kay either C or A. Let's see. Which one is incorrect? There is double taxation because two taxes, income tax and gross receipts tax, are imposed on the interest income. Describe one double taxation is prohibited. Okay, so this one is incorrect because, again, I mentioned double taxation is not prohibited per se. What is prohibited is direct double taxation. And for it to become direct double taxation, you have to satisfy all the elements I have listed a while ago. Okay. Mr. Alas sells shoes in Makati through a retail store. He pays the VAT on his gross sales to the BAR and the municipal license tax based on the same gross sales to the city of Makati. He comes to you for advice because he thinks he is being subjected to double taxation. What advice will you give him? Okay, answer is, I think you had unanimous answer, ma'am. Double taxation is allowed where one tax is imposed by the national government and the other by the local government. Nga naman, kay lahi sila og taxing authority. Correct. Choose the correct answer. Tax avoidance is what? Okay, answer ninyo is, someone said C, someone said, B, yeah. Na C, na B. B, okay. Tax avoidance is a tax saving device within the means sanctioned by law. Na nag-answer C, no? Okay, ang C magod is employed by a corporation or organization of which is prompted more on the mitigation of liabilities than for the. Okay, so tax avoidance is a tax saving device. It is not just employed by a corporation. It may be used by anyone. Which statement is wrong? The power of taxation may be exercised by the government, its political subdivisions, and public utilities. Generally, there is no limit on the amount of tax that may be imposed. The money contributed as tax becomes part of the public funds. The power of tax is subject to certain constitutional limitations. Is wrong, ha, is wrong. Which statement is wrong? Okay, answer. Correct. What makes this wrong? What makes A wrong? Correct. Public utilities. So only government and its political subdivisions may exercise the power of taxation. Which among the following concepts of taxation is the basis for the situs of income taxation? Ito ba niya ako sa naglabel ko sa akong question. Sakto dahil, sakto dahil. Okay, answer. You all answered letter B. Correct. Symbiotic relation in taxation, diba? Because situs of income is on the place where the person enjoyed the earnings, diba? So, it's not just sa Philippines, then naprotektahan po siya sa Philippines. I mean, receive siya of benefits from the Philippines, so he has to pay tax for here in the Philippines. Symbiotic relation. What is the rule on the taxability of income that a government educational institution derives from its school operations? Such income is what? Take note, this is government educational institution. Sige daw. You all answered B. Okay, answer. Exempt from income tax if it is actually directly and exclusively used for educational purposes, diba? Regardless of the source. Actual effort exerted by the government to effect the exaction of what is due from the taxpayer is known as okay. Answer. Collection. Okay. An example of a tax where the concept of progressivity finds application is the asa man ani, ang naay progressive. Okay. Okay. Correct. Income tax on individuals. Kaning amusement tax on boxing exhibitions, I think this is a percentage, other percentage tax. So fixed na siya nga rate. Okay, so that ends our discussion on the principles of income taxation. This afternoon, we will be discussing tax remedies. Okay, can we start by 1:30 para taas pahuway sa tingog, ha? So let's start at 1:30 using the same link. Do you have any questions before we leave?
Not so far, Miss.
Okay, sige. Thank you so much for joining this morning's review session, and see you all again this afternoon at 1:30. Bye and have a happy lunch.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you, attorney.
Thank you.